Welcome to the third hearing of the Select Committee on the response to major flooding across New South Wales in 2022. The inquiry is examining a number of matters relating to the preparation, coordination, and response to the North Coast and Western Sydney floods by the government. I note that this committee was established by the Upper House of the New South Wales Parliament and is separate to the New South Wales Government's inquiry into the floods. I acknowledge the local Aboriginal people, the traditional custodians of the land in which we are meeting today, and I pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of First Nations people and their ongoing cultures and connections to lands and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Today, we'll be hearing from a number of stakeholders, local members of Parliament, local mayors, community associations. I thank everyone for taking the time to give evidence to this important inquiry. Before we commence, I'd like to make a few brief comments about the procedures for today's hearings. Today's hearings are being broadcast by the Parliament's website. Transcripts of today's hearings will be placed on the committee's website when it becomes available. In accordance with broadcasting guidelines, media representatives are reminded that they must take responsibility for what they publish about today's proceedings. While parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses giving evidence today, it does not apply to witnesses what they may say outside the evidence at the hearing. I therefore urge witnesses to be careful about comments you may make to the media or to others after you complete your evidence. Committee hearings are not intended to provide a forum for people to make adverse reflections about others under the protection of parliamentary privilege. In that regard, it is important that witnesses focus on issues raised by the inquiry's terms of reference and avoid naming individuals unnecessarily. All witnesses have a right to procedural fairness according to procedural fairness resolution adopted by the Parliament in 2018. If witnesses are unable to answer a question today and want to take more time to respond, they can take that question on notice. Written answers to questions taken on notice are to be provided within 21 days. If witnesses wish to hand up documents to the Secretariat, they can do so through the committee staff. In terms of audibility of today's hearing, I remind both committee members and witnesses to speak into the microphone. Finally, could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing? Thank you. And now just a small formality here before we begin. I remind Ms. Saffin and Mr. Provost that you do not need to be sworn because you've already sworn an oath as a member of Parliament. However, Councillor Cherry, would you please state your full name, your position, and swear either an oath or affirmation?
Christine Arlette Cherry, Mayor of Tweed Shire. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Now, under our committee's rules and regulations, you are able to make an opening statement if you wish. Councillor Cherry, would you like to make an opening statement, a short opening statement?
Yes, I would. Thank you.
Thank you.
To do that now?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to do this and for coming to our Shire. Council I would like to table a formal submission to the inquiry.
Thank you.
I hope that you have already been provided with a copy of it, and I'm very happy to answer any questions on it, any information in there. From our perspective as council, we feel that the state emergency services, when people think of state emergency service, you imagine an organisation that has a very lot of capacity to help people during an emergency like this. And at this point, I think there needs to be more resourcing put into the state emergency services to be able to deal with the scale of the events that we are having. So we are putting forward a suggestion that we would really like it if fire and rescue and Rural Fire Service and SES are joined into one combined emergency group that respond with the police. I would really like to, our primary focus is that our electorate has been identified by the Climate Council to be one of the most at risk in terms of climate change in the coming years in Australia. And we also have a population who has a much higher percentage of vulnerable and low socioeconomic people in our community. And so we are a community that is least able to deal with a thing where we have the most risk. So what we need, and the only way that we really see forward in the times of coming events, is to get people out of flood risk way, out of risk of natural disaster, because we can do a lot of things. We can increase levies, we can put a lot of mitigation in place, but the single thing that is going to mean that we're not back here in the future doing exactly the same thing is getting people out of the floodplain. And so we have a lot of suggestions in our submission for that, in terms of voluntary house raising, voluntary house purchase and land swaps, both for industrial land and employment land. And we would, we are desperately asking that those programs be given significant funding and immediately to try to, because the time is now. People are ready, they are having to make decisions about voluntary house raising, voluntary house purchase. They're getting their insurance payments now, and people who reinvest back into those homes are not going to take up moving packages in the future. So I think that's what we're asking for, the urgent consideration for government.
Thank you. Mr. Provost and Ms. Saffin, would you like to make an opening statement? Mr. Provost or Ms. Saffin?
Yeah.
And or both?
I think both of us.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah. Both.
I mean, Mr. Provost.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Look, thank you for the invitation to come along. Obviously, the last floods were very horrific for a lot of people. It affected virtually everyone in the valley. People lost their houses, lost their incomes, and lost many things. And also the significant impact of the mental well-being is still being felt across. In terms of just a brief opening statement, there's probably just probably 3 or 4 issues I'd like to touch on. The first one, what made it difficult, and I was sitting in boats, etc., was the lack of telecommunications. Back in 2017, we lost it for about 4 or 5, sometimes 6 days. This time we had certain areas that went over for 10 days, maybe 12, maybe a bit longer. And one of the differences is we had NBN now, and we didn't have NBN back in 2017. And who would have thought that the whole of the North Coast is fed through Woodburn? Who would have thought that?
That was a surprise.
I don't think anyone did. And that made it, once you came south through Barty's Point Bridge, that made it incredibly hard. You're virtually back to carrier pigeons and so on to get messages through. And it made that mental anguish of people not knowing if the floodwaters are going up, going down, etc. So that was a really, really big issue. The other issue I found, and being out in boats, etc., there was a lack of coordination with some of our emergency services. I, for one, thank the SES, bearing in mind in both Moolumbar and Tweed, you have around 20 to 30 members in each one, and only half are active. And of that, a number of them are over 60 or 65, which is not that old, by the way. It's not that old, by the way. So they did the best. In terms of the lack of coordination, was we had, being in a boat, we had $2 million worth of marine rescue boats, all keen, ready to go, but they weren't tasked. Why? Because they weren't trained in floodwater. But they were trained in driving through the bar when it's got 10-foot seas. So, and they were sitting there. I, for one, was actually loading food and stuff into people's boats. We had well over 100 community members with their boats. The concern I had, excuse me, as the local member of parliament, I had no idea whether the 2 guys in front of me in the tinny had fuel, had life jackets, knew what they were doing, and I was basically saying head there until somebody waves you down, you know, and we thanked them. They rescued people, whether it was famous surfers on jet skis or just people up the road. Everyone was waiting for the tasking, and the tasking seemed to be so long in coming. The other issue I had was with the bomb. In Tumbulgum and places like that, you had 3 warnings in about 6 hours saying don't evacuate, then don't evacuate, and it was just terribly, terribly confusing. I think the Tweeds come out stronger, finally. There's a lot of talk with the villages in certain areas to develop their own little evacuation pod, where generators, phones, blankets and things like that. It's brought the town closer together. And also just working with council, I've got to praise the council staff. They obviously put their lives at risk trying to close off roads and that, but it's bonded the town. It's been horrific for the town, but I see there's a real strength, and that's why I welcome the inquiry today.
Thank you, Mr. Provost. Ms. Saffin, would you like to make a short statement?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The committee, of course, has my evidence from yesterday, so I won't recount that. And I'll touch on just a few issues because I can't go into detail. But firstly, I'd like to support what the Mayor and my colleague, the member for Tweed, said. So back in everything that they said. And I've been doing that at government level as well, backing in particularly what Tweed Shire Council have put forward with the voluntary house purchase, the voluntary house raise, the land swaps and the buybacks. And they've got accosted Tweed Shire Council, and I'd actually been doing that before the flood, and because they've upgraded it now or taken a second look, I've put that forward. And you've heard about Railway Street, of course, but there's many other places right across Tweed Shire. And the member for Tweed and I, we, share a lot of the footprint in the electorate. Me with Lismore, Jeff with Tweed, and so we all work together on these particular issues. And so what I'd like to say with the voluntary house purchase, that's essential that happens sooner than later, and it happened right across the electorates because people are waiting for it. And I got asked, would the Northern Rivers Reconstruction Corporation deal with that issue? And I said, well, they have to be seized with that issue from day one because it's one of those pressing priorities. We know where the houses are, they're all mapped, and that can be done. And in terms of, the land swaps and the buybacks, and Tweed had already done something successful on that post-2017, so have some experience particularly with the land swapping and moving around. There is voluntary house purchase too. There's actually a fund, and the committee's probably looked at that, and it requires, I think, a third. Councils cannot fund that at all. It's just impossible. And that's why, I always say it's got $2 in it, that fund, because it has.
What's the name of the fund?
It's voluntary house purchase and voluntary house raising. Yeah, so it does exist. It's existed for a long time, but very little attention and money in that. So we have to do that, and we have to look after the residents who are ready for that to happen, because some of them have been told here that they could wait 20 years because of the lack of funding for that. A couple of other things. Insurance, you'll hear about insurance. I'm sure you're looking at it. We're totally underinsured here, and people have been costed out of the market. People say to me the insurers should do better. Well, yes, they can do better, but I always say they're not Mother Teresa. They're a commercial insurance provider, and the government actually has to step in and work with insurers to make sure we get something like a reinsurance scheme that Northern Australia got. And I've already met with the Treasurer and written to him and met with all the insurers and met with the Insurance Council of Australia. So just flag that issue. Also, in terms of housing, I flag it again, there's got to be more flexibility the way the agencies are turning that out now, and not just everyone in a pod in a park somewhere. That's fine for some, but people have got to be on their patch, on their land, and where it suits. So we've got to make sure that that happens. We need continued work with repair, restore and help, because it's the local communities, the community groups, and they were here in Murwillumbah too. They're the ones who are helping people a lot, and we need to resource them to continue that. But for the next 6 months, I would say we need people still to be able to go to someone and say, well, do you need a little bit of help here? You know, in your property, in your house, in your area. And there are some who do that well, but it's certainly not the government agencies, but they can back in the ones who are doing it. So there's community groups doing it, you know who they are, they've been before your committee, and also someone like DRA, Disaster Relief Australia, who it's probably unparliamentary if I repeat the word they say, but they say they do the you-know-what work that no one else does. So we need them. On mental health, what I'd like to say about mental health is the government announced initially $25 million. That was early. I welcome that. I back that. It went to the same providers who do what they do. And I did say to the Minister and the Recovery Coordinator the night before that that's not the be-all and end-all, because you need a collective community response to mental health and trauma, and you heard a lot of that yesterday, and that stands. You heard those with expertise, because it's a whole different response that's required. It's just not an individual problem. It can become an individual problem, but it's a public health problem, and it needs to be responded to in that public health way. And landslips are big, and normally governments don't respond to landslips on private property, but we've got so many landholders, we've got so many farmers and I know that's being looked at, and we do need to look at that in this instance. And particularly I know in the Tweed Shire, that is a massive problem, and we've all been out together looking at them, and seeing places, and so that's a real problem. And on the issue of grants, the grants, before a disaster happens and it comes to preparedness, we know that grants will follow. We know what most of those grants are. They exist. You read them, I read them, people can read them, and they need to be prepared for, and they need to be tested beforehand and have the package ready to go. That didn't happen, and that needs to happen, because, it's not that difficult. I know it can be difficult with the quantum, but it's not that difficult to do. One of the first questions people got was, when did the flood event happen to you? And that just sent people spare, because we all know when the 2 flood events happened, and I said to the people administering, you may have a reason to ask that question for a matter of probity, integrity, whatever. You do it at the end, and you just simply say, well, of course, did it happen then, but you don't do it at the beginning. So there's a whole designing to happen around how things are done, because it re-traumatises people who already are suffering when they have to go through inordinate questions that are really not necessary. We know there's fraud, that can be prepared for as well, and the departments need to hook up with the police sooner. The police actually have a unit that deals with it, and I know that they weren't hooked up initially. So things like that need to happen. And I do want to relate one person I was working with, supporting, and it was just a bureaucratic nightmare. And after being asked repeatedly to give the same documents that person kept giving, that person, of course, had a bit of a meltdown, as you would, and the police were notified and sent to do a mental health check on that person, and I was furious. I was just furious, because that person was, well, I think it's obvious by what I'm saying why they were being re-traumatised. That just should never happen, and that should be expunged from that record, totally. And on one other issue, the farmers, the Rural Assistance Authority, that operates separately to the other grants, and say for the $25,000 that they might be able to get for fences, one of the farmers rang me on the way here, local one, and he's been told he might wait 3 months. That's ridiculous. because farmers need to put their fences up straight away. We all know that. They need to work on it. 3 months, 3 weeks might be acceptable, might be, given, you know, the urgency, but 3 months, and it wouldn't be all looked at now, only I had to intervene.
Paging Marcus to the loading dock, please, Marcus.
It's a club, it's wonderful.
It's a club.
It's community. So, hope they found Marcus. And on the last point, mitigation, councils had already put forward their mitigation priorities, and over a long period of time, I've got 4 councils, it will be 5 after the next election if I'm re-elected, and I'd put forward their mitigation priorities to government, but there was no urgency around mitigation, and my memory is that that budget was cut, the state mitigation budget, and that needs to be seriously looked at, because there's a lot of things that can be done with drains even, and I think Tweedshire Council have put forward again their needs in terms of drainage, because that's a real issue. So we just need to get those things underway, and I know Jeff's looked at that as well, that whole issue of the mitigation and the drainage. We've been doing it. SES, last point, they need to be professionally trained combat agency. That's where we do need a combat agency. And the wonderful local volunteers, we all love them. They deserve better. If you go up the hill here to their headquarters, it's a toxic building. I mean, toxic physically. It is mouldy. There's holes in the floor. I've raised it, Tweedshire, we've all raised it. I understand someone from Treasury came up recently and had a look. I think I talked about it in the Sydney media. That got a bit of attention, more attention on it. And they've had a look. But they shouldn't be, it's not fair that they're working in that building. It is just not fair. Look, there's many more points, but I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open the questioning. Ms. Saffin, I'd like to get your response. This morning, the Premier at a press conference, in response to a question from a journalist, was asked, what if half of Lismore cannot be rebuilt or has to move? And he said he would look at it. What is your response to that?
My response is that the Northern Rivers Reconstruction Corporation is tasked to work on those issues with the local community. I drove the establishment of that body relentlessly from day one. It's set up. It starts on the 1st of July, and then it will have to work with community front and centre, and we will look at all of those issues, but we can't take too long to look at them, because people are making decisions now, as the Mayor said around here. So my response is yes, I would expect that issue to be looked at seriously by government, but first of all we need to have what I call hard talks with community on what they need to do and how they can build back better. That's been the commitment given by the Premier and others, build back better. What does that mean, and what does that mean for those communities?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Cherry, earlier today when we were looking at flood damage and you mentioned that there's significant road damage. Now, we've heard from other mayors that there have been hundreds of millions of dollars in road damage. What is the estimate of the road damage to Tweedshire roads?
For the Tweedshire Council, we estimate around $80 million worth of damage. We've got over 2,200 reported faults, and that's, we're not including potholes in that. That we are only including landslips, undermining, and that kind of serious damage, significant repairs. So, and some of those projects, Scenic Drive, Talgum Road, Reserve Creek Road, are incredibly complex landslide problems, and they will take around at least 12 months to repair.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Provost, you're the member for Tweed. Yesterday, your colleague, member for Lismore, Janelle Saffin, made quite critical comments of an organisation called Resilience New South Wales. Did you You're shaking your head a little bit. What is your experience or your dealings with Resilience New South Wales?
Look, I know what my colleague said about resilience. I still have faith in resilience. I think some of their processes need to be refined. In personally dealing with them, they tried their best, I think, under the circumstances to deliver things. Things were moving at a rapid pace. I'm not as critical. I think it's the policies that they're operating under. I think it was their first big disaster since the bushfires down south. So, look, I think, in all honesty, that they tried their very best. But I was critical at some of the slowness. I've been waiting 6 weeks or 8 weeks on relocatable home announcements or support there. And getting told that it keeps going up the line. I don't know where it ends up, but finally I believe it's coming out today in support of that. But resilience to me, they're accessible, but at times didn't deliver, and I blame the way it was set up in terms of that.
Do you still have people in your community living in tents and living in interim accommodation?
Yeah, I have look, last count was about 400 people in some emergency form of accommodation from here up to Brisbane. The pod rollout is probably a lot slower than I anticipated. There are a number of people I'm aware of that are sleeping in mouldy houses and things like that, or sleeping in their cars, or a tent in somebody's backyard, or couch surfing. I mean, yes, to answer your question, we try the best. Accommodation in Tweed affordable housing has always been a difficult issue. We have a high percentage of homeless people coming through. This has just made it worse because there's a lot of inhabitable houses and that. So yeah, there is a number. We're slowly working through it to the best of the ability. But establishing pods and that takes time with infrastructure and that. But as I said earlier in my beginning address, I'm really concerned about the mental well-being of everyone. We're very blessed here, I think. We have some really great communities. Here, even in Wollongbar, there's been a lot of resilient people here that put together aid packages and that in Tweed, Heads, Chindera, Burringbar, Wright Mobile, Crabs Creek. So I think they've been one of the big heroes of our local area.
Thank you. Ms. Sharp?
Thanks for coming today. Mr. Provost, I actually I was very interested in, you talked about 2017 and, so people have been through, obviously not as extreme, but been through this before. There would have been reviews after 2017. There would have been discussion about how do we prepare better. What the impression that I get over the last few days is that there was work done, but somehow that wasn't ultimately being able to be enacted in any useful way in the most recent flood. So do you just have some reflection on that? And for you too, Councillor Cherry, in terms of what happens from 2017, and not looking actually to apportion blame, really looking at how the systems failed to actually learn those lessons?
Yeah, appreciate the question. I think it's a very good one. There were reviews. I think I sat in this very room back after 2017. Not a great deal has changed. There was more resourcing for our SES, but as I said earlier, the problem I've got with the SES at the moment is the lack of volunteers. There's very little. I think we've got one per 1,500, 2,000 people, where if you go to a Sydney area, you've got one per 500 people in terms of volunteers. So there is a lack. Quite frankly, this is my 5th or 6th flood over 33 years. And after each flood, we have a review like this. We come up with a heap of suggestions, and most of them never see the light of day. The one I'm really critical of, each flood we have a review with the federal or the Commonwealth and the state operation in terms of grants and that, and that's where it gets really, really early. 5 federal reviews I've seen. Has anything changed? No, not really. It's roughly the same. So I'm a bit disappointed. I think we can learn a lot. I think the last review back in 2017 spoke highly of local knowledge with water levels, flood levels, the way the river's going to go, etc., etc., etc. Not so, and moving slightly away from technology and predictions and things like that, but that never eventuated. We still reliant on observations from here or reports going back to Wollongong, the head of the SES down there, and finally it filters back here. So, yeah, to answer your question, lots of reviews, lots of reports, and not much on the ground, to be honest.
Councillor Chair, do you have some reflection on that?
Yes, I think it has to be said that the requirement for mandatory vaccination did severely impact on all of our volunteer organisations, including the SES. So I think, you know, we have had that real blow to our resourcing there. In terms of programs and reasons why we haven't moved forward, and no blame attached, but there was no funding, $2 billion across the state put into the voluntary house purchase and voluntary house raising program. And
how much was that, sorry?
2 million.
I thought they might have said 200 million, 2 million.
The 200 is about what we need.
Yes.
Yeah. 2 million is what was there. So that, like, it's not a reasonable figure to be able to get people out of the floodplain. One thing that has also impacted is, you know, council embarked on the industrial land swap to move some of our bigger businesses out of the flood zone. Unfortunately, that did take the progress of getting that, because it's a kind of a first happening. It has taken a lot of organisation to get to happen, and so it hasn't eventuated. So those businesses that were moving and are moving were still hit by this flood. So that, you know, that's a big shame. But obviously, for the next flood, we hope they will be not there.
So, I mean, thank you for that. Is really the questions that we need to ask when this committee goes back to Sydney and has the agencies in front of us to follow up all of the issues that people have raised. It sounds to me we need to ask them, when you keep talking about community-led and you keep talking about local knowledge, why are you continuing to centralise? I mean, Resilience New South Wales has been established in that time frame. It seems to me that there's been nothing learnt from all of those 5 plus 10 plus reviews. Perhaps that's the question that we need to ask them.
Could I just very quickly add that the regionalisation of SES is very difficult. We've got an incredible amount of local knowledge here within our SES, and the ability to make local decisions would have greatly enhanced, I think, in terms of warning times and things.
I've got one more question, if that's okay. And it's probably to all three of you, really. Everywhere we've been, the community effort and the people who have just gotten up and got it organised despite all of the difficulties and often under very difficult circumstances themselves, so much energy and focus. How can government support them, not in the next few weeks, but in the next 12 months, 2 years, to really be part of a genuinely community-led recovery?
I'm happy to start. You cannot express how much these community members have made a difference between people surviving and getting through this last 13 weeks. I think, you know, government just needs to look and say, you've got your leaders, they've come forward through this event, so you need to speak directly to them about what they can see and how they saw it unfold, what needs to happen going forward, because they are the people who are right there, right on the ground from day one, and we could not have gotten it through it without them.
Ms. Sharp, the fire and rescue have a community system where they supply a trailer with firefighting materials, uniforms for streets that are affected by bushfire. I think seeing what they've done here in Mooloolaba, Tobolga, Burringbar and so on, something similar, because what happens here, you get cut off, whether it's a landslide, whether it's floodwater, you actually physically can't get there short of a helicopter. Well, we could perhaps supply, one of the things I found, a little generator, some fuel, maybe a satellite phone or two-way radio, some clothing and bedding and that. Unfortunately, when the floods hit here, those resources are slow in coming out, or they can't get there. I think the communities are far more aware they'd have to fend for themselves for a while, but if they had a central point and a focus, I mean, it's a big ask with some of the communities, but I feel the mode is there, and I think that's a big way that we can resolve some of these issues.
It requires preparedness, and that hasn't happened. Like, some communities do things like that themselves, but again, it comes back to preparedness, and we can support communities to get ready. And already some communities have gone out and, they're getting their CB radios, and some young people ask me what they were, all the different radios. So I know they've done that in Nimbin and different places, and it'd be a good question for the committee to ask how many SESs have sat phones as well, things like that. And in other terms, the community groups who set up here and in other places and in villages, just resource them to do the job they're doing. They do it well.
Kate Fear.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to go back to Mr. Provost, who was talking about the 2017 floods and the fact, I think you said you lived through or been through 5. The fact that there has been reviews after each one. So the 2017 flood and the reviews after that, did they recommend community-led responses?
They did. Tumbulgum was probably the chief leader in that. Tumbulgum village, they picked up on it and ran with it. But some of the other villages didn't. But I think the time is now. They're far more attuned to the effect of being able to fend for themselves, look after for themselves, far more. But once again, we didn't have any funds. We didn't have any funds to buy a generator and a shed or something to put it in. My way of thinking, a lot of our little villages have a RFS. I think we should encompass them. They've got some training in it. But the Mayor's quite right. We lost a lot of volunteers over the mandatory vaccinations.
I'm just so thinking then, just in terms of government responding to that, what happened with that? And, I'm sure you're a champion for your local community. In terms of going back to government after that review and saying, can you put in place these recommendations, what's happening within government? Why aren't things happening?
Basically, it wasn't really picked up by government. I kept pushing it hard. The response was that we sent around teams out of the SES to advise the communities how to set it up. But when it came physically, and I think this flood showed us how the importance of having a generator, because last time we lost power for 2 or 3 days, here we lost it for a week and a half type thing. To have that money to actually facilitate buying these items and putting them here, and even getting them to our evacuation centres. So it was received well.
The recommendations of these reviews, are they being ignored by government? Is that
I think there's
what's
just
happening?
I don't think they're ignored. There's just a slowness for the bureaucracy to move to insert them into
which
reality.
recommendations have been implemented?
Oh, look, we've had extra training with our SES in fast water rescues. We've had extra gear, like we've got baby life jackets now. We've had a number of those recommendations that come through, but they're more of a physical nature and a training nature for SES. There wasn't much action in terms of relaying it into the wider community and making the community more resilient.
Councillor Cherry, how much support has been offered to the community? Are there any gaps in terms of those families who have been displaced, who have been directly impacted by the floods? What has been the outreach? Have they all been contacted? Have they all had the services that they need provided to them?
Look, I think there has been an attempt by the state government to ensure that people understand that there are services there, but the reality is that there are a lot of people out there in our community that are still have not, whether physically or mentally, they have not been able to access the services. And because of what Ms. Janelle was talking about in terms of the difficulty of the paperwork and things like that. Some people have tried and then just given up. It's too hard, or they just can't face it. So we have found that right now Resilience New South Wales has started to go around through the community and door knock and do face-to-face and say, I think they're acknowledging that people have slipped through the gaps and that there is a gap out there in terms of people accessing services. And so I was provided with some figures yesterday, I believe, where in the Northern Rivers, the Resilience New South Wales has door knocked 3,500 homes. Of those homes, 1,200 homes had people there and answered the door, and of those 1,200, 500 had not accessed any kind of help services. And like these are homes that are, you know, it's not randomly looked at. Resilience is looking at areas where they expect that they have been impacted, and so they're, you know, looking in flooded areas. So that is a horrifying statistic or discovery that we've got so many people out there that aren't getting the services that they need yet.
Thank you.
Mark.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, for the mental wellbeing of your communities that you represent, seeing, I guess, progress and change happen at a significant rate will do wonders for that. So outside of money, outside of a decision around housing, what are some other levers that you would like to see government pull, whether it's changes in regulation or legislation that maybe speed up this recovery? What are some levers that you would like to see the government pull?
If I could go first here.
Yeah.
In terms of planning, that's always to put a secondary dwelling on your property while you fix your house.
Yeah.
Technically, you can't do that as a secondary dwelling. There are a number of planning issues that really need to be fast-tracked to allow us to get on with the recovery. The last thing you want to do is to tell somebody they've got to fill in all this paperwork and go through a lengthy process. And by the way, to get a simple DA at the moment, no reflection on council, could be anywhere from 3 to 6 months to 9 months, if not a year. So if you've lost your house and you want to build a better house, you're living in a caravan and you've done all of that, you've got the money, you're ready to go, but your DA is going to take another 12 months. That's just cuts you to the core. I know people that have said, this is all too hard, I'm going to move somebody else. You know, they move interstate and things like that. So the planning issues are the really big ones at the moment in this recovery phase. And in terms of, unfortunately, we suffer like the rest of the state. There's very few mental clinicians available, psychiatrists and that. I know other areas are similar, but I think the average wait list to see someone could be anywhere to 6 months, which is just far too long.
Ms. Cusack?
I think Ms. Sutton was just going.
I'm sorry, Jenna.
Yeah, secondary dwellings, of course, and I know that's been a vexed sort of issue here, but also just the practical things, like saying, yes, we're ready with voluntary house purchase, you know, we're ready with the things that you as a community want. Yes, we will have some community groups resourced so they can come and give you assistance. So all that practical stuff really, that improves community mental health. It improves public health. So just being as soon as, like it could happen now, but the corporation's due to set up 1st of July, and we will expect the community, and I know the councils will and the other members, for them to hit the ground running.
Just very quickly, on the secondary dwelling issue, you know, while we understand there is a great need, if we think about the event that we just had, a lot of our people who were in rural areas were affected by landslips, did have their access roads destroyed, and, you know, so if we had, you know, a lot more people in those areas, we do need to, you know, understand that we would have a lot more people at risk during those times. So we need to think about that. But in terms of going forward, planning reforms is absolutely something that we need. We need some kind of residential land swaps. We need some more clear guidelines on where people can and can't build, and an idea of getting rid of some of our residual legacy areas that are zoned for residential, but we can see are very, very much not appropriate to have residential houses built on them, but for local council to be able to fund buying back those kind of properties or back zoning them and compensating the owners is a very difficult thing. So we need higher levels of government to be able to fund that kind of a program.
Ms. Cusack.
Thank you, yes. From Resilience seem to have a policy that they don't want to put temporary housing on blocks of land that have just been flooded, which rules out an awful lot of available Crown land, but also all of the homes that have just been flooded, which is where people want to go to. Could you comment on that, please?
So this is something we've been pushing from day one, is that people need to be housed next to their home so that they can build back, because they need to be in their networks, they need to be at their land where they're able to do the repairs. People don't want to be housed on the Gold Coast or wherever. And so in terms of being able to, we have been pushing to try to get pods or caravans on people's properties, and while we understand that people don't want to, the government doesn't want to put state assets onto flood liable land, people often, on rural properties, people often have land that is higher and out of flood liable land where those temporary structures could be located. And so we're very much asking for a case-by-case basis. We very much think that this one-size-fits-all approach that has been taken is not the best for us, for the Tweed, and we're certainly still pushing for that option to get, because you're getting people staying in their cars and in tents on their property because they want and they need to be there. So let's help them do that.
Yeah, Ms. Cusack. Look, it's a very hard policy because you're going to limit where you're going to put people. And ultimately, as previous questions relied on, mental health is a big issue here, and I think you need some relaxation. And I say that with all due caution, because the way the weather patterns have been, you might get a flood next week, or there could be disasters, but at least they're relocated, and at least you can move them, and at least if we get warning in that. But I agree with the Mayor, you've got to have people close to where they abide. The kids can go to their normal school, their networks, their social networks, their doctors, their supermarkets and things like that. I think that's a really crucial part. This trying to find flood-free land, it just goes on, just delays it. Like you could probably put another 2 or 3 months onto delay by doing that if you went down that path rather than the other one. So yeah, I think it's crucial.
Can I just add another? Winter is coming. Is there anything special that needs to be done for those individuals who are not able to be adequately accommodated at the moment, which seems to be thousands of people?
Yeah, look, as I said, we've got about 400 to 500 in emergency accommodation, and that's usually in a motel or a hotel or something of that nature. My concern is the ones that I think Chris and Janelle, the ones that slip through the cracks. For some reason or other, they're not putting their hand up. They're scared that, particularly in some of the caravan parks, they're scared that the government will come in and say that they've got to demolish their house. And they've got nothing. They live usually from week to week. They've lost their car, they could have even lost their job and things like that. They're the ones that I really worry about in this colder weather, harsher weather. I'm aware, and our assertive outreach team by the Department of Justice, they do an excellent job. We have 5 people that go around every night under the bridges and that, and they've had enormous success in creating emergency accommodation for people and also long-term accommodation. And recently we got permission to actually start putting some of those people. This is typical ABC. And we got, believe it or not, up until recently, we couldn't put people in emergency accommodation across the state line. Okay, even though there was places and facilities for them. So we've got now permission to do that, and that's relieved a lot of the stock But bearing in mind Queensland were going through their own natural disaster roughly at the same time, so that's put a bit of a strain. But little things like that really mean a lot. But to answer your question directly, yes, I am concerned about the physical and the mental well-being.
Ms. Saffin, would you like to add anything in that area?
Just to echo what both the Mayor and the member for Tweed said, and I did get asked that in the media this morning about winter and being cold and those people, and I said I was quite concerned about what heating ability they had, because some of the people are back at their places. They don't have proper power yet. They've got the two plugs, and they have to wait to get the electricity on, and they don't have, proper warmth and things like that. So I said we just need to do a bit more, and that door to door makes a difference.
Thank you, and thank you for participating, and thank you for your time, and thank you for what you do. Thank you.
No, that's all.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. Respectful of time. I'll put additional questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Rose Jackson, Natasha.
Thank you for participating. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to do some formalities. If you could state your full name, your title, and whether you'll take an oath or an affirmation, and then read whichever one you choose to do, starting from the left, Ms. Esposito.
Thank you. My name is Francesca Esposito, and I'm Chair of the North Byron District Activation Community Flood Response Group. I'm taking an affirmation. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, ma'am. Your name, full title, and oath or affirmation.
My name is Catherine Snell Stoddart. I'm a member of the Queensland Ratepayer and Progress Association, and today I'm taking the affirmation. I solemnly and sincerely truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, ma'am. Sir?
Good afternoon. My name's Peter John Newton. I'm the President of the Kingscliff Ratepayers and Progress Association. I'll be taking the affirmation. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Now, under the regulations and rules of this committee, you are able to make a short opening statement if you wish. Would we, each one of you, all of you, or none of you, each one?
Do you have a statement?
Yeah, you have.
Okay, we'll start from the left. Ms.
Oh, sure. Okay. My group, the North Byron District Activation Community Flood Response, represents 12,000 residents, 5,000 houses, 500 businesses, 8 suburbs, 5 community associations and chambers in the North Byron District. We are 1/3 of our council's area and the biggest residential precinct. We've run 2 massive community meetings off our own bat, and we discovered that 2,343 homes were flooded in the North Byron Shire. We actually went street by street and house by house and counted. The Insurance Council of Australia has confirmed that there are 2,854 claims just for our 8 suburbs, valued at 100 million. This is half of our homes, farms and businesses. So to say that we've been wiped out by these floods is an understatement. We understand that there are 200,000 claims so far from this flood event, but the community needs the state government to step in and provide some real help. The main problem is that 95% of these insurance claims are still unsettled, which means that in suburban Ocean Shores, we have families sleeping in sleeping bags and tents in their mouldy lounge rooms with no walls, no power, no hot water. They're showering at the gym and eating from the barbecue every day. We have third world conditions right here on the east coast of Australia. The other alternative is to take a rental for $1,400 a week, which is the average rent in Byron Shire, if you're lucky enough to find one, which would cost you $70,000 a year, and insurance only covers 6 months of this. I've written to the Premier several times asking for an increase of the $7,200 rental support scheme because the subsidy only covers 1 month's rent in Byron Shire. But the Premier's office has declined all of our requests. The problem is if displaced families are out of their homes for another 2 or 3 years, if you live in the Byron Shire, if you don't have a spare $200,000 lying around for rent, you'll be plunged into poverty. Unfortunately, the attitude so far from most agencies I've spoken with is that of business as usual. The problem is that we're not anywhere near business as usual. I've also written to the Insurance Council of Australia asking for some serious insurance reform because the whole system of insurance is flawed. We therefore need our state government to work together with the Insurance Council of Australia, as well as our local councils, to deliver what the community desperately needs. What we need is flood cover to be made mandatory. We need flood insurance to be subsidised. We need house elevations and waterproofing to be subsidised or paid for in full. We also need the sum insured replaced with the market value so that folks don't find themselves underinsured. We need advocacy on behalf of the community, and we need to cut the endless red tape. It's horrendous trying to get any grants. And the state government has the power to reduce our flood recovery to years rather than decades. We need the government to also step in and subsidise Starlink satellite dishes on every community building and surf life-saving tower, because Starlink was the only internet that worked. We need subsidies for generators in every household. We also need state government to step in and provide more funding to our councils, because our block drains, which Byron Council, for example, confirmed in a public meeting last Thursday, have not been cleaned for 30 years. No doubt these block drains made the impact far worse than what it needed to be. It didn't need to be that bad. But our council hasn't got the money to clean, hasn't had the money to clean our drains for decades. We also need DAs to be sped up. It's taking months. Perhaps the DA could become complying development rather than a full-blown DA for house raising at least. That's the minimum. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I defer to the President.
Oh, Mr. Newton.
It's the first time for everything. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Firstly, on behalf of the Kingscliff Ratepayers and Progress Association, I'd like to thank the committee for considering our written submission and also for the opportunity to appear today at this hearing. Our association has been operating continuously since 1933, and membership is open to all residents and ratepayers within the 2487 postcode, including Kingscliff, Coogin, Chindra and Fingal. Firstly, before I go on, I'd like to inform the committee that we strongly endorse the Tweed Shire Council's submission to the 2022 New South Wales Independent Flood Inquiry, which has also been tabled to this inquiry today. We believe that this detailed and thoughtful consideration of the full range of facts and recommendations provides our community with a framework for future flood planning. So, moving on, by now, the inquiry has heard many stories from across the northern rivers of individual trauma, issues around flood preparedness and the lack of coordination of initial response and recovery, the loss of communications networks, sudden and unexpected flooding in areas previously immune. The stories from our community mirror these. However, rather than relate similar, albeit traumatic and important stories, I would like to flag to the committee 4 key messages from within our written submission and also from members of our community. So the 4 key themes. Firstly, flood preparedness needs to take on the same level of importance in our culture and thinking at all levels as bushfire preparedness or even cyclone preparedness in northern Queensland. The community and community associations such as ourselves and others can really play a significant, valuable role here. Secondly, I'd like to acknowledge the forgotten residents of the Chindra caravan parks. These residents are among our community's most vulnerable and have no voice. More than 1,800 residents were evacuated in the dark in terrifying conditions by rapidly formed community rescue teams. These residents need meaningful government support now. They're falling between the cracks. Thirdly, the absolute need to stop development on flood-prone land. As a community, we do not have faith that the existing New South Wales planning frameworks can adequately address these concerns, particularly given the recent withdrawal of the 9 principles of sustainable development. we've actually got no faith or trust that when it comes to planning, the state government acts in the best interests of our local communities. And fourth, our concerns, our deep concerns as a community, that this flood event will be used politically, could be used politically to undermine our framework planning, our LEP, and further compromise the protected lands across our shire, but within our community, particularly the state significant farmlands on the Coogin Plateau. Protected lands should be protected lands. Cutting red tape in this event is extremely important. Unfettered cutting red tape is a frightening concept. It is, after all, the red tape that protects the livability and amenity of our communities and will hopefully lessen the impact of future flood events. There are two key principles that our association would like to see built into any recommendations from this inquiry. One, it's clearly an engagement with traditional owners in developing strategies and plans in relation to the low-lying flood-prone land. The second principle is to, very simply, for this inquiry to push for a realignment of the spend on disaster recovery versus mitigation. And finally, I'd like to assure the committee that the Kingscliff Ratepayers and Progress Association will continue to work on strategies with all levels of government and stakeholders and our community to build resilience in preparation for our next unprecedented event. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. In your opening submission, you mentioned the Chindra caravan parks.
Yes.
We actually visited one of the parks this morning. Can you assist and explain why you decided to point out that particular section of the community?
On behalf of the association, I've been talking with some of the community advocates that particularly focus on the residents of the parks, and as the committee may know, that 1,800 people were evacuated, and they've been described to me as the forgotten people. No more complicated than that. What's happening as we speak is that out of the 1,800, 50% have actually returned to the parks. Out of that 50%, 25%, half of the 50, are actually back in their accommodation and moving forward.
Wet accommodation.
Yeah, well, the other 25% that are back in the parks are actually living in uninhabitable buildings. They've got nowhere else to go. Now, the remaining 50% that are not back in the parks, they're either in, and Mr. Provost mentioned this, and Mayor Cherry, in the earlier hearing, at the early part of the hearing, they're couch surfing, they're living rough, they're on the good graces of relatives, and they've got nowhere to go. The other thing I will mention on these people, that doesn't sound right, on residents of the parks, is that they are the most vulnerable in our community. They are extremely vulnerable. There's a lot of elderly people. This is the thing. They actually own the building. They don't own the land. But what that means is they do not qualify for any of these subsidies to help them get back on their feet.
Absolutely.
It's, from our perspective as representatives of the community, we cannot get our heads around that. And so as I indicated in our statement, we're asking this inquiry to take that on board.
Actually, I'm sorry, Mr.
Yes, Catherine.
Chair, sorry. Could I indulge for Mr. Provost to respond to that? Because that issue is one that he's personally addressed.
Well, no,
okay.
we don't. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
There is an answer to that, which you'll be happy about.
Thank you. And I'll just
Thank
sorry,
you.
I'll just find.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. The other thing I'll mention, and there was some chat about winter. Winter's coming.
Yes. Please.
The thing that they need, and I'm talking about the Chindra residents. and there is a donation hub that's set, and it's there for the long haul. They want blankets. They need blankets, and these are for the people that are back in their accommodation where the place has been gutted, and quite honestly, it's uninhabitable. So there's blankets and the basics of life to get you through winter. So they're chasing blankets. The hub itself, which is a huge part of our community, a significant part of the recovery effort and the rebuilding and the moving forward effort, they were in temporary accommodation under a tent and a couple of containers in front of the Coogin Leagues Club. They need a permanent place. They need a place with a roof, like an empty shop, empty premises, to be able to have a central place for people to go to and to work from.
Ms. Esposito, could you bring us up to speed on the 2,343 homes in Byron?
North Byron.
North Byron.
Yeah.
So is assistance flowing? What's actually happening there?
It's at a standstill. Grants are very slow to be issued. A lot of people have fallen through the cracks. A lot of people don't qualify for various reasons.
Are they being told why they don't? What are the reasons that they're getting for not getting grants?
For example, there's one couple on a farm and their driveway is washed away. Their studio and garage, where each separately works, has been flooded and isn't able to be used, but the house didn't flood itself. They don't have a driveway, they can't generate income, and they don't qualify because they didn't flood enough. So that's the sort of stories that I'm hearing, is that you just didn't flood enough.
How much flooding did they actually get?
Well, they've lost their studio and garage. So the husband works in the garage and the wife works in the studio, and the driveway has washed away. So they have to walk with gumboots into their house, but they can't have clients come to their two businesses. That's the sort of stories that we're hearing, it's criteria that is excluding people for various reasons that don't seem valid to me.
Thank you. Ms. Sharp?
Thank you, and thank you for your submission. I think this is for you, Mr. Newton. I read your submission carefully, and I was struck that you mentioned two pieces of correspondence. You know, you've written actively to the Planning Minister in relation to the floodplain land and the approvals, and with suggestions of dealing with that. And at the time, I think we got your submission on the 15th of May, you hadn't had a response. Have you had a response to date?
No, we haven't. I can add to that if
Please
you'd
do.
like. Just we did also, and it's not in the submission, and I realise it's an oversight, with the earlier letter to the Minister for Planning, we also wrote to the Agricultural Minister as well, Minister Saunders.
Yes.
And so similar letter, but no response to that. Can I say in relation to the protected lands, that we, as an association, greatly appreciate the continual and much voiced commitment of our state member, who's been publicly a number of times now categorically stating that no further development of those, inappropriate development of those lands will take place. I say the same for Councillor Cherry as well, who's a strong advocate in that area, and also our federal member, Justine Elliott, who has actually stood in Parliament to speak, federal Parliament, on that very subject. Having said that, we are not getting any response from the Planning Minister in relation to this, and the actions of the Planning Minister certainly over the last little while do not hold us in any confidence that we are in a good place for when the red tape starts to get cut and when things start to happen under, to be able to rehouse and rebuild and so on. We deeply fear that as a community, that the flood recovery and rehousing rebuilding effort will be a vehicle to be able to allow unfettered inappropriate, unsustainable development across our beautiful region and in our community.
And just to follow directly on that, you've not been invited at any point to. I mean, I don't think there's any disagreement that we need to cut red tape to get people back into their houses. But that sort of, what are the rules around that? The fear that you raised. There's been no invitation from government or otherwise to bring people like yourselves to the table to have a conversation about that.
No, thank you for the question. It's in terms of our shire. One of the things that strikes you about living in this shire and working in community roles and so on is that the local authorities, so the local government authorities and the stakeholders and the community work together, like completely together in developing the plans and really that shape how we live and work, work and play here. So our fabric, amenity and livability, highly consultative. Nothing happens in this shire without community involvement from the ground up. Where we are under threat is from external forces outside of our control, and we don't need to go into it here, but there are more than a number of documented cases where the outside authorities will come in and gazump thoughtful, considered planning, which goes to the heart of balancing the need for growth and development with maintaining the fabric and amenity of the community. So from a community level and working within with the local government and other state authorities, this shire is probably a benchmark.
Thank you. Is that right? I was very interested in the points made by Mr. Provost earlier, and it's a real dilemma. I'm not pretending that this is an easy issue. Is the desire for people to be rebuilding on their land where they currently are, but it's flood prone. And I just noticed, your submission is very strong on that this needs to stop. But how do you think that needs to be balanced? Because clearly it's a very complicated and difficult issue for individuals, but also more broadly.
In respect to our community, so the community of Kingscliff and surrounds, we have a significant amount of land which is historical approvals for development, which can go back 10, 12, 14 years. The world's different. The world is very different, and we all got very much a wake-up call 3 months ago in terms of what that might mean moving forward. So, quite simply, our view as an association, we cannot continue to develop on the lowland. So the approvals that were made 10 years ago really don't hold weight today, and we need as a community, including all the authorities and stakeholders, to actually rethink what we do here. Our view as an association is stop it. We cannot continue doing what we do now and building houses, residential places, and putting people in harm's ways, which also affects the rest of the community, as we saw in these recent flood events ourselves in the community. We cannot continue to do that. Otherwise, we'll be sitting talking with you in a few more years' time when the next only on a bigger scale.
Thank you, Mr. Newton. I'm just mindful of time. Kate, you have a question or Kevin? Okay, Scott.
No, I'll go. You go.
Mine is a very simple question. In terms of North Byron, are you referring to the Brunswick River?
Brunswick heads up to Wooyong.
So the homes and people you're referring to were affected by flooding in that particular river? Yes, thank you.
Including 90% of the caravan park at Brunswick heads.
Okay, so this is a river between the Richmond and Tweed. Yeah. So, and thank you for coming. So thanks for clarifying that. That was my question.
Mr. Nugent, I've got just in my time available, I've got one question for Kingscliff Ratepayers and one question for Ms. Esposito. In your submission, you talk about the many historically approved pending developments in the community which no longer meet the environmental and floodplain management standards of current times, and that your organisation is very concerned about those historically approved developments that are clearly would be a very bad idea if development was to occur on them. Could you just maybe give examples of what they are and where they are?
Yes, they're in the Kingscliff, well, speaking because we represent the the community. They are planned residential developments in the Kingscliff community, many of which, much of the land is actually lowland, which natural drainage land in our community. In terms of the actual size, can't answer that off the top of my head. I can tell you though that the planned developments are upwards of around 3,000 residents ultimately, including open space.
And how flooded did that area get recently?
Giant inland lakes is probably the natural drainage lands. The natural drainage lands. The whole Kingscliff's north of the creek, the Kingscliff area to west towards Coogin is lowland. It's natural drainage land. And so that flooded, and what exacerbates the flood is obviously the built-up residential that's there now. Natural drainage, we fill in more of it, the water's still got to go somewhere.
So if there's a big lake there now, then you put a suburb where the big lake was, what happens to those houses and all the houses around it is more flooding?
And it's happening already. The houses, the flooding that happened in the North Kingscliff residential area was from the riverine, the river flooding from the Tweed, but also exacerbated by lowland slated for development flooding and running into the river flooding and wiping people out. So.
Yes, Esposito, thank you. We could talk about that for some time.
Yes.
Ms. Esposito, thank you for your extensive submission. There's a lot of work that's gone into this, and the committee's just received it recently, but it's very extensive and we'll read it thoroughly. Throughout it, you do talk about the mental health impacts and trauma associated with, you've put down here people reporting that they have not slept since the night of the flood.
Yes.
Some describing persistent nightmares, many feeling too overwhelmed to work or function. We heard last night from one member of the public in Lismore who talked to us about the trauma of hearing the rain on the roof. Lots of people are nodding behind you, in fact I think almost everybody is, as I say this. What support is being offered to your community, particularly in relation to mental health support, and what more do you need?
We don't have any support really. Everyone I speak to, I'm sending them to the Mullumbimby Recovery Centre.
Wow.
Pretty much everyone I speak to has not received grants, doesn't even know about the grants, doesn't know about the Disaster Recovery Centre, doesn't know about the mental health lines that are available. The fellow who hasn't slept since the night of the floods, he sleeps in a tent in his backyard while he's put up his family with 4 children and his wife in South Golden Beach in an Airbnb for $1,600 a week. And he sleeps in a tent in the backyard at the house and he's not sleeping. It's horrific.
And
what we need, to answer your second part of your question, is we need some kind of rollout that's more extensive. The key messaging's not getting out there. We're a community-led group. I lost everything. I flooded as well. I've assembled a group of people who had the skills to be able to provide some community leadership. And we're asking everybody these questions and feeding our answers back into our state submission and into council as well. But what we need is some key messaging that is more extensive, because even I just can't reach enough people in what I'm doing. And I've been working on this full time for about 9 weeks, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I'm an unpaid volunteer.
Thank you. You're another one of the amazing women that we have heard from supporting their community during this time. Just one quick, I just wanted to check, because Councillor Cherry was talking about a door knocking that's been undertaken via Resilience New South Wales more frequently, recently I should say. Has that gone through your community? Do you know
it has,
how much?
Resilience New South Wales has done some door knocking, I've heard, but it seems to be two very different initiatives. Whatever Resilience New South Wales is doing doesn't seem to trickle back to us. We've gone door knocking as well. I've got a team of 7 people doing letterbox drops for each of the community meetings, and we're literally on a map with streets, and we're knocking on doors to get people to our meetings. Our meetings are about between 200 and 300 people. We've had 2 so far, and I've invited Justin Elliott, Tamara Smith, councillors, and they've all come. So they're massive meetings. So the council's not running these meetings. Wow. Resilience New South Wales is not running these meetings. We are running these meetings, and we're from the community. So I've discovered an extraordinary array of talent just in our, what we call our bathtub. Geologists, surveyors, hydrologists, civil engineers, myself with commercial skills, and an incredible array of people that have been able to, we've just assembled, and we've formed a steering committee, a community flood steering committee, with all of the specialist technicians, and we're actually coming up with our own flood response and our own approach. This isn't being done by any level of government, and we're doing it ourselves because we're all affected, and we want to, flood 3.0 is imminent, and we want to protect ourselves. So I'm in a rental myself, $13.50 a week, and my insurance company says that it's going to be 2 to 3 years, so that's a cool $210,000. This is just a normal story. So hence why I'm writing letters and reached out to the Department of the Premier and the Cabinet, and it's just business as usual. I attended the Insurance Council of Australia meeting last Monday night, and I spoke to the COO, and I spoke up there as well and sent an email to the Insurance Council of Australia, and as well I've said this is not business as usual. We need processing time cut down for insurance claims. We need DAs to maybe be knocked back to a complying development perhaps, but that's difficult in our area because we're in National Park and Marine Park, and that has to be a DA. So there's all sorts of red tape, which we're not asking for corners to be cut. We're just asking for some efficiencies to be looked at. DAs, for example, for any flood-affected housing and quality, or any sort of housing and quality of life to be prioritised, just to be shuffled to the top of the pile, and anything non-essential to be shuffled to the bottom of the pile, like a commercial development or a pool, can go to the bottom for a few months. We're just asking all levels of government to step in and provide some efficiencies, some funds. The key messaging is not getting out there. We're not getting the messaging from Resilience New South Wales. The folks that are getting help and support is coming from our community-led group, and I'm physically sending people to the. I'm texting them grants, and I'm up to newsletter number 7, and I'm including links for grants in the newsletters, and that's how people are finding out. They're not getting the message from the government.
Can I just ask one question about how you are communicating with those people?
Sorry, go ahead.
Newsletters and community meetings.
And when you were saying texting, so you've got a phone tree, your newsletters, any other social media?
I'm an ex-software engineer, so we programmed a QR code, so everybody that checks into our meetings, we've got their email address and phone number, and their permission, obviously, and we're sending them newsletters with links. So we're building a database with their permission to be able to send them information. So I've noticed that the $20,000 back to home grants being updated, the criteria today, so I've got a newsletter coming out tonight with all of that, and people are relying on that information coming from my group. And we're just a community-led volunteer group of professionals who happen to have some professional skills, and we're able to activate, which is why we called ourselves Activation.
Thank you, Mrs. Esposito. I'm just mindful that we have other witnesses and we're now cutting into their time. So I thank you. Thank you. Welcome. Now, would you like to state your name, your title, and an oath or affirmation?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. My name's Simon Stahl. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Casino Food Co-op, formerly the Northern Cooperative Meat Company. And I'll take the oath. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Now, our committee allows for an opening statement if you wish to make a short opening statement.
Thanks. Look, it'll be brief. Essentially, the message today is about collaboration. I do represent the cooperative. It's one of the last meat processing cooperatives in the country. By our very nature, we're very connected to our communities. I also sit with a group of the Cooperatives Alliance. It's a capital of cooperatives across this North Coast. And I'm also representing today the Business Council of Cooperatives and Mutuals. They had a submission number 21 in the paper. So happy to explore that further. And we then, there was a late paper that forwarded to the committee earlier this week from our business. But what I'd like to be able to discuss today is really the ability for what the inquiry needs to consider is how government can partner and empower the local communities, but more importantly, cooperatives and business and actually other larger businesses. Our experience in the post the emergency was it was the community that has and did a lot of the heavy lifting, and I think it's appropriate, and I think that's where business can contribute, particularly cooperatives can contribute to the rebuild and to the future of our community. So I really implore this committee to have a look at how you actually get more. And I don't want to just say it's a business focus around the table, but it's a commerce and it's a commercial sense around the table. Because we don't have a lot of layers. When you talk about red tape, for me red tape is all these layers and layers and layers of governance. And so after every inquiry, there'll be another layer of governance about how people do things, which is absolutely not what you want to do. You want to be stripping that away and empowering the right people to make some decisions when it happens. And I've provided a couple of examples of how the community, we've all heard about the Bodies and Lismore, but there's hundreds of those other stories around, the lower rivers and the casino area. So that's probably my opening.
Okay, that's fine. I'll start off the questioning. So we provide a report to the government when we make recommendations. So what would be a key recommendation that you would like us to recommend to government that would support your members?
Well, look, I think the obvious one for me in the community would be a general manager of councils as a focal point for the emergency disaster. And from what I saw in the Lismore sector of the event, I guess, was emergency services took control, but they operated in their own silos, and they really, there looks like patch protecting, and there looks like levels of bureaucracy that they've got to go through. I think the general manager of a council, a good general manager of a council, should be connected to their community in terms of the leaders of the community, particularly business leaders, because businesses, again, have a lot of assets and a lot of people that they can deploy quite quickly and will do it for their community. So I think, and look, not every general manager of a council is going to be maybe experienced in disaster management, but getting a committee around them of community leaders in the first instance, I reckon, is critical. And then, you could have a system where you do parachute. I do believe in parachuting someone in from out of the region that's experienced to lend a hand to that, the GM of a council, to be the main connection if they're overwhelmed, because it can be overwhelming. So that'll be the first one. And I think in the second one, in the rebuild, I think absolutely there has to be commercial players around the table of the discussion. All the issues that we're hearing about rebuilds, etc. So from our company's point of view, our 50-odd employees that have had damaged houses, we had our own electricians go and help fix their houses. I can do more of it. Other businesses will do more of it. And why that's important to us is because we need our employees to know that there's a future in our region and in our businesses for a start. So if they haven't got an amenity to life, if they haven't got the housing, if they haven't got the cafes, etc. in the schools, we're no good as businesses. So we're ready to invest and put our time into that. And I think that should be a very heavy consideration. Resilience New South Wales, I've heard a lot talk about it. Never met anyone from it. No, I haven't met anyone from Resilience New South Wales. Sat in the back of a meeting that I attended with all the emergency services in the early days. And I'm not here to throw sort of rocks at any particular, but someone's given a portfolio, probably from an inquiry from another disaster, that said we need another level of government. Well, it's not working. There's my view.
Thank you. Scott.
Thank you. Looking more at the recovery, short and long term, and I'll jam a couple of questions in here for risk of not coming back to me. What have been the impacts on job opportunities here, short term and long term? Because I would imagine that job security is going to be important in the recovery. So what are the impacts short and long term? what is needed short and long term to aid that security and longevity of those jobs. And I guess now's your chance. There seems to be a bit of an appetite to pull some of that red tape back. What are some of those levers that we can pull to help the business community?
Look, the housing crisis was well before the flood event, and we have established 60 worker-type dongers on the abattoir out at Casino. We started that project, say, last August. And for 2.5 months it was held up by another department in Sydney that was arguing over modelling of an ammonia that we have on the plants at these meatworks. And the inability for a department in Sydney not to even visit the site but to hold it up for 2.5 months was incredibly frustrating. And it was an argument over someone liked a different model from two different people. Right? So forget, I suppose, the detail, but again, you're holding up development, you're holding up opportunity. Now, that conversation about building 60, we've got plenty of ideas about actually having a stepping stone. People can't just live in these, what we've put up on site. We want them to move into the next stage of their housing, which is lower cost housing. We've got plenty of land and we can build it. And we can build it in a type of model like a community housing, cooperative housing. We've had a look at the Norway models overseas. We can certainly have a look at the 50s plus type models, but actually for families that want to go from one step to the next step before they go to the final step, because the cost of housing is out of the reach of a lot of people now. But we've got ideas, and I just don't see it gets through. We heard before about the mental health services. In Casino, there are no mental health services that you can get to without dialing the 1-800 number or something else. We've put on two full-time counsellors. We sent our 2 counsellors down to the evacuation centres, and they were the first counsellors they saw. So again, private enterprise can do it. So where does government now partner with us to have a look at that as a problem, as well as the housing, as well as the mental health? The opportunity's there staring everyone in the face, but it just seems to be a resistance. It gets to I can talk to the Chris Galaptis, I can talk to Janelle. They get it, and then I hit some walls in some of the departments, and that's where it stops. So that's the challenge. Look, I mightn't have answered your question, but I think getting business around the table, first and foremost, what's the plan of the guy who starts on July 1, what's his plan? You know, who's he going to engage to? Is he going to be working with departments, or is he going to be working with community and business? That'd be my question to him, because we've got plenty of ideas.
Mark, you have a question? Just spreading from that, I mean, you've covered it a little bit, but was there anything that the cooperative wanted to do, but the bureaucracy and red tape stopped you from doing in this instance? You know, bureaucracy and red tape is great at saying no, you can't do it. So I'm just wondering, was there anything that you wanted to do as a cooperative that you were sort of stopped from doing?
No, look, specifically in the first 72 hours, really nothing, because we did it.
Yeah, we just did it.
We just did it. So, for example, the great example in the paper there was that we heard the boaties in Lismore, but the people that... So we had the helipad out at our meatworks because we had refrigeration, we had meat, so we're helping with the airdrops. The people from Corokai were phoning our people saying, we don't actually want a food drop, we just want ice and fuel. And no one was allowed to go on the rivers, on the boats, for obvious reasons, for authorities, SES, etc. It's too dangerous. The locals did it anyway. We supplied them with what they needed and they went and did it. So nothing stopped us because we went and did it.
So, but post 72 hours, when the bureaucracy creeped into town, did anything stop you?
No, for me, no. I'll go and do what I have to do. I'll send my people out to fix a house, but we can do bigger than that. I do sit around. I meet socially with a lot of the bigger business leaders in the community because it's in my best interest to understand where they're going, where their issues are around labour and around housing. But no one else seems to think that that's important to connect. There's lip service and you have some meetings, but you don't really dig into it. It's as though it's a domain of other departments and not business.
Sue.
Thank you. So will you be engaging with the Reconstruction Corporation? Have you kind of got a plan to engage with them in the event they don't come and engage with you?
Well, no, it should actually be, have they approached you?
Yeah. Well,
No.
I don't think, I think to be fair at this point, as much as the dissatisfaction has been said many times, July 1 is way too late, and I think that's acknowledged across the whole of the Northern Rivers. However, if we accept 1 July, is that a way you think that this could you could come to that table?
Yeah, well, absolutely. You know, we're there ready to come to the table, but we've already started. There's a general manager in the local region that's already got some business leaders around the table. And over an hour's discussion,
Is that more?
Yeah. There's a lot of thought about where to from here, and I think that's just it's a general manager that I've known for a while, and he gets it. He actually gets business people around him, and he's now getting it from all ends. Now, what we need around there is the right people who can make the investment and make things happen. And the people around that table might employ something like 15,000 people. One of the companies has already spent $30 million on fixing up their business in Lismore. So they're committed to the area, and they've got wonderful ideas about where to go. Has anyone stopped to ask them?
Now, can I ask you a question about yesterday and the day before we had evidence that there's a chunk of the community, young people between the ages of 18 to 20, late 20s, who are just packing up and leaving, going to Brisbane, going to Sydney. Are you finding that there's sort of a skills shortage or an employment shortage in certain areas of the community after the floods?
No, not after the floods. I think it was before the floods, before the floods. We've had in train getting Pacific Labour Scheme workers over here for some time. The skills and the employment of the area it's a massive issue, but we're dealing with that separately, I think, through immigration at the moment. Look, our counselling services is about actually getting people to stay and work when they have some problems that they can't deal with. Our counselling services are actually engaging with the people that have been unemployed for a long time to actually break down those barriers for them to get into employment. One thing when someone comes to see our counsellor is what I can fix is give them a job. What I can fix is give them actually a variation. What I can fix is I can give them a bed. We had one apprentice, his house was flooded, he moved back to his folks at Gunnedah. He's now back on site living in one of our dorms. It's better than a dorm, but you get my point. I can actually do things on the spot. You don't have to worry about now, let's go to housing. Let's go to a job provider. I mean, some of the times I get told that you have to go to this department, because they've got the funding for it. It's a waste of everyone's time, and it's not effective.
Now, can I ask you a question? You're the Northern Rivers Cooperatives Alliance. Do you have any relationship, or do you fit in with Norco?
Yes, so Norco's a senior member of ours. They were with us in the inauguration of it, as the macadamias, the fish co-ops. I'll miss someone out here. The 7 or 8 co-ops, or blueberries.
So what's happening with Norco? I understand that there's some uncertainty. What's going on with Norco?
I wouldn't like to speculate on behalf of Norco. I mean, they've got a difficult decision to make about the rebuild in Lismore for sure.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. I just wondered if you had any insights into that, or any discussions in that.
Yeah, well, I do, but it's not for me to share here, with all due respect, Chair.
Can I ask one follow-up?
No, I thought I'd ask you that. Well, I had you there.
Can I ask one follow-up?
Yes, Sue.
When you say you can give a job,
Yep.
Could you be a bit specific? What sort of job are you talking about?
Anything from completely unskilled to highly skilled, apprenticeships and everything.
And when you say around the meatworks, you mean?
Yeah, we've got an operation at Booyong, so closer to Bangalore. We've got and the major operations out of Casino. We can work for 2 hours or 4 hours or 6 hours if you've got kids and you've had problems at home or whatever. Flexible, we can do anything.
Thank you.
And we could employ 100 people today, and we'll keep trying. But we've got to have the housing, and we've got to have the amenity, and Lismore is so critical to us because half our 1,000 people do come from the Lismore Shire or the Lismore City Council region.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned earlier about getting to mental health counsellors or professionals down to, was it evacuation centres? Can you just talk us through that? How did you determine that there was a demand? Clearly, anybody would determine that there was a demand, but the fact that your organisation got those first mental health counsellors there before any publicly funded services arrived.
Well, it is easy for us because they live there for a start. They're in the community. We had a lot of our own people having to seek counselling, and they were actually at the evac centres, and it became quite apparent to our people that there was no one there.
How many days into, if you're hearing back from your members that they're needing mental health service, that's a few days into the flood, after the 28th of February. Right.
Oh, this was after the first. It was the first flood that Casino had a lot of the floods, so that was the 28th of Feb. This was in the first few days when they were at the evacuation centre, because we were sending the food drops and even into the Casino one from the meatworks with with the goods. But we also then had our councillors go down because we just knew it made sense that there'd be people stressed.
Do you have councillors already employed with your organisation?
Two full-time councillors. And we've got a proposal in front of Bronwyn at the moment. The Minister Ronnie Taylor. She's been really receptive and open to what we've put to her, and we want to do a pilot of a program where we go partners in actually putting on more caseworkers to help and more counsellors. And it's a public-private partnership. Again, I've been talking about it for a couple of years. Again, you talk to the right people and they pass it on to the other people, and it's a federal or it's a state. But anyway, I'm getting pretty close to that.
Could you share any documentation on that proposal with us?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. And if you can take that on notice, that would be good.
Yeah, and just to be clear too, I'm getting a really good response. Bronnie's coming up with her department in the next couple of weeks. We've put a proposal in front of them, and I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, we might hold her to it.
Oh, well, I don't want to play games, mate. I'm just going to get on and do it.
Now, so you've been talking about the business impact and that. How important is that we get Lismore back up on its feet for the economic recovery of the region?
I think we all know it's going to take a long time, but you've got to give them some confidence that actually something's happening. And I think if you talk to the right people, and particularly say the Lismore general manager, and don't want to single them out. I'm sure there's other general managers doing a lot of good stuff in their regions, but of particular importance to me is Lismore. That's where my commercial focus is and my home. But just give people hope that there's actually a vision for the future. We know we've got to wait for a CSIR report. We know we've got to have a look at a town design. We know some things have got to move, and nothing's going to happen overnight, but we can absolutely with confidence say, look at these people that have invested money in the town. The Lismore Square is a great example, right? They've announced they are goers. They believe in the future of the town. Let's use that to actually say there is a future here, and there's some people with real firepower in the region getting behind it, working with the government to actually give us a vision for the future. I mean, some of the housing problems I'm hearing about, you can't get sheeting and you can't do this. Commerce can fix that too. We can get supplies. We can go, has anyone talked to Bunnings about opening up more and more? I don't know. Surely they have, so that the Lismore people can find sheeting, can find temporary solutions. I can put builders on weekends from our meatworks if people only ask.
Anything else from other members? All right, thank you for your time, and if you can provide that material you promised, that would be great.
Yep, sure, no worries.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Now, I'll make a quick announcement. Now, we were scheduled to resume at 3:15. We're going to bring it forward by 15 minutes and begin at 3 o'clock with a short presentation, and then we'll begin with the public forum. So we'll cut the break, and we'll cut the break quite short, and we'll start at 3 o'clock. Go Bangers Residents Association. Is that correct? Thank you, sir.
Okay. Pardon for looking at the side of my head. Just I need to obviously be able to.
You can try to talk.
Pardon for talking to looking at the side of my head. Obviously, I need this to show the presentation. Anyway, we're the Cabarita Beach Boggangar Flood Mitigation Committee. We are formed literally 8-9 weeks ago, based on the last flooding event, and this is what we aim to achieve. The problem we have is visibility. Quite frankly, not many people know even where Boggangar is. We need to increase our visibility to Tweed Council, New South Wales Government Departments, resident awareness, and also to let people know that we are not the same as everyone else. We're not on a river. This is not a river flooding event. So just to give you a quick look of the topography, we have Kingscliff up here, which my colleague from there comes from. We're down here at Boggangar. Basically, we have an area called Cudgeon Lake, which is fed by Claudia's Creek and Reserve Creek, and then we have one outlet called Cudgeon Creek, which then flows to the sea shows to the sea. This then gives you another idea in terms of the flows of water. So we're not a river. What we've done to date, we've formed the committee, we've had some communications with Tweed, we've contacted some of the councillors, and we're starting to create our own documentation on why we believe the flooding is happening, and more importantly, what we believe, how we're going to fix it. So we're consulting with experts, environmental architects, hydrologists, etc., detailed reading of council, government and historical texts, and we're applying to join the Tweed Council Floodplain Advisory Committee. We're coordinating with other organisations, Friends of Coogin Nature, Borongar Resilience, Coogin Drain Union, and as I said, preparing a detailed document of facts and recommendations to council and state government. That document isn't available there. We're still in the process of building it, but as part of our concept of gaining visibility, I took the opportunity of speaking to at least let people know who we are and what we're doing. Some statistics that basically shows you the flooding in Bogongar over the last 37 years. The yellow ones are effectively a 1 in 50-year flood event. The red ones are the 1 in 100-year flood event, although the most recent one was actually classified as a 1 in 700-year flood event. Last week, we just missed out. We got to a level of 1.94. If it had got 60 millimetres more, we'd have had 4 consecutive months of flooding in Bogongar. This shows you some of the trends. Last year, the flooding event took 64 hours to get to the last metre of flooding. This time, it took 14 hours. Although technically not a flash flood, it comes very close for Cabarita, appearing to be a flash flood. This is the lake minimum height per month, averaged per year. And what we can see is the lake is getting higher. We have the same thing in terms of the average maximum height over the last 37 years. The lake is getting higher. What that means is the flood maps that we have at the moment, which were mostly created around about 2009, are out of date, and the majority of Bogongar in a high flooding event is going to go underwater. Most people don't even know, and I can say categorically I haven't heard once the name Bogongar in any of the proceedings we've had to date, which is why I'm here. So what's happened? Tweed Council has done floodplain risk managements. They've looked at Moorball, Pottsville, etc. No modification measures or no mitigation measures were evaluated. They looked at enhancing the gauge network for various other creeks. The creeks in our area were not mentioned. In the submission to the flood inquiry last month, 5 lines of the 40-page document mentioned Bogongar, acknowledged that we were not warned, and said that due to a lack of maintenance may have contributed, should be investigated, but unlikely to be significant. I won't read the whole email for those of you who've got the text, but effectively it says communications with Tweed Council engineers have said basically it rains, it floods, that's it. What we think has happened, Coogin Lake is a 160 hectare lake. It's a perched lake, so above. It is no longer tidal. It used to be a tidal lake. It's environmentally changing. Multiple species are no longer seen, and we see minimal uptake by New South Wales Parks and Wildlife. The history of Casuarina was a sand mining area. I show this picture to show the type of topography what was there 30 years ago. It used to be a floodplain. Now it looks like that. So completely developed, hard surfaces, no longer a floodplain, retains water and then reduces into Coogin Creek, which again slows down the creek and causes flooding in our area. The council mandate for development, the important numbers are in 54. They said that all development had to be at 2.19 metres. They then changed that to 2.45 metres subsequently, and in 84 adopted 2.95 metres. We believe there's no doubt that when Tweed Council does their other assessments, given the latest flooding, that figure will go even higher. Claudia's Creek catchment area. So the catchment area for our lake and our little creek is approximately 100 square kilometres. There is no formal rain gauge in that area. Anecdotal evidence from council claim it was 600 or maybe 700 or maybe 800 rain for the 2 days prior. Kingscliff, Murwillumbah and Tweed Heads, we've got gauges, we can see exact numbers. They don't quite correlate, but nobody knows. Tweed Coast Road, which is raised by sand moaning and tarred by main roads, creates a barrier for the lake and the creek and floodplains to the ocean. Tweed Coast Road, that's the old Bogungar Bridge on the right-hand side. Under that bridge flows the stormwater runoff for 100 square kilometre catchment area. In the last flood, it got to the top. It was higher on one side than it was on the other, and anecdotal evidence says basically that's turning into a dam rather than a bridge. Coogin Creek is not flowing properly. Tweed Council, we understand anecdotally, is doing a study which is due in June, and we're looking forward to that. That's what Coogin Creek looks like. So how that can be the main channel out of our area to the ocean for some 7-9 kilometres. What we think happened, we had about 300 houses out of a township of some 1,300. We lost over 200 cars. And the main reason is people didn't get warned that the flood was coming. So the loss of cars was significantly. I know that's not as big as some of the other areas like the Lismore and the Murwillumbahs, but we've got to be put on the radar as well as those organisations. It's devastating to the environment. Sewerage was released in the lake. And again, with everyone else, the trauma of the event, the stress from current and ongoing financial hardship, and I agree with everyone personally, and I've heard anecdotally from lots of people, every time it rains at night, we worry. Every time we go rushing to the computer, what's the rain pattern doing? What's the lake height? Because it's not a case of if it floods, we know it will flood, and we know it will flood worse. What we think might fix it, firstly, is get government to recognise Bogungar. We need to be on the map. We're documenting facts, including supporting recommendations from our environmental engineers and hydrologists. We will then put a strategy in place to present to Council and New South Wales Government, and then advocate action. What we think might fix it is some upstream management to clean and renaturalise Coogin Creek to flow better, and there are environmentally correct ways to clean up estuary flows. We're investigating those, and we document that as part of our submission. We also believe that a high flood culvert or channel to the ocean, either under the car park or walkway at the mouth of Coogin Creek, or along the radiation zone along Tamarind Avenue, should also be considered as a viable, long-term, permanent solution to flooding for our area. We don't want Coogin Lake to stop flooding. It is a flood zone, it is a floodplain, it's always flooded. What we have to do is account for the peak of flooding above the 50, 60-year high level. And of course, the elephant in the room, as my colleague from Kingscliff said, is the development. If you look at this map on the top right-hand corner, you see Coogin Lake. That development, slated, is bigger than Kingscliff and Bogungar put together. That is currently a floodplain. That will be built up, or has to be built up, to accommodate all of those housings.
What's it called?
The suburb is called Kings Forest.
Oh, that's Kings Forest, sorry.
Okay. So the next steps we're going to do is finalise documents to be presented to council and governments, including desktop, environmental and engineering hydraulics support, find a way to finance a full study and advocate to fix the problem. Basically, doing nothing is not an option for the 3,000 residents of Cabarita Beach and Boggangar. I thank you for the opportunity to do a presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we begin our public forum, I'd like to call the first participant, Jennifer Kidd. Yeah. Yeah, we'll do that at the end. And after Ms. Kidd, we'll have Mr. Paul Hessian. Okay, I have to do a short little statement before we begin. Welcome to today's public forum for the Select Committee on the response to the major floods across New South Wales in 2022. The session is an opportunity to hear directly from people who have been impacted by the floods on the North Coast. You'll have to bear with us. The public forum is a relatively new innovation for the New South Wales Parliament, so please bear with us. We have about 15 registered speakers at the moment, and before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about procedures for today's public forum. Speakers have been asked to register in advance, and those of you who have registered to speak will be called upon to speak in turn. You'll have 5 minutes to speak, and we will sound a warning bell or a tapping of a glass at 3.5 minutes so that you'll be aware, so that you can conclude your comments. And we'll try to adhere to the 5 minutes as strongly as possible because we do not want to rob people of an opportunity to speak. So be mindful of other participants. So today's proceedings will be transcribed and streamed live on the Parliament's website and will be included as evidence in the inquiry. Now, I stress it's important that we keep as possible to 5 minutes to ensure that everyone has an opportunity. And it's also important to note that all participants are covered by parliamentary privilege. Committee hearings and public forums are not intended for a forum for people to make adverse reflections on others under the protection of privilege. In that regard, it is important that participants focus on issues raised by the inquiry's terms of reference and avoid naming individuals unnecessarily. Finally, can I sincerely thank those who have come along today to share their story. It is important that the committee hears your personal stories about those affected by the floods. It will help shape our report and formulate what we hope are important recommendations to put to the state government. Thank you. Ms. Kidd, and you are our first witness.
Thank you, Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to speak. Tumbulgum is an historic village.
Sorry, and if you, for future participants, if you can speak into the mic.
Oh, sorry. Tumbulgum is an historic village, 156 years old, on the Tweed floodplain at the junction of the Tweed and Rouse rivers. It would be fair to say that our village is flood experienced. We are isolated early in flood events because of flooding of roads out in and out of our village. And it'd be fair to say we haven't received one warning yet in a timely way from the SES for evacuation, except to say that we'd need to evacuate when flood heights expected are only at a moderate level. So it is a conundrum for the community to leave or not leave when you're only expecting a moderate flood. After the 2017 flood and its associated devastating loss, we got together with our community to set up a flood-resistant and resilient community. We worked with engagement of our villagers in to plan and prepare self-help and establish communication channels and look to mutual support. We also looked outside the village to establish strong engagement with and two-way communication with other agencies such as the SES and the Tweed Shire Council. To that end, we received a 2019 Resilience Award from the New South Wales State Government. In 2022, floodwaters entered the upstairs habitable area of over 50 homes in our village. That's 5 times more than we had in 2017. Our post office, restaurant, church, sports club and tavern were also inundated. The village lost power early in the event and the NBN services were lost. Mobile communication was unreliable throughout. I should say it's normally a little patchy anyway. This surprised us given that we'd lost NBN services in 2017 when our local tower on the floodplain went under and that rectification hadn't occurred from a risk management point of view from the federal government at that stage. Our preparedness stood us in good stead as we faced that unprecedented flood because people had to rely on what they'd learnt in our preparation phase. The hub communication network was maintained until its integrity was lost due to technology failure, and the power turned off meant that people's mobile phones were no longer charged. Flood-hardened villages were surprised at the height of the flood, and about 300 residents were evacuated to the local bridge in boats by local spontaneous volunteers. Many had a second trip that was from the bridge further over to Terranora. Some residents living in flood-resistant houses decided to leave after the power had been off for 2 days. And currently, like the other stories you've heard today, we've got families living away, people camping inside their houses that are now becoming mouldy, and people in caravans on their sites. Since that time, we've met with the SES and are looking at upgrading our response, our local response, and looking at improved safety, such as acquiring adult and child life jackets, flexible ladders so people can climb off their upstairs balconies into the boats, CB radios so we can have a local control centre as well as CBs in the boats, and large fluorescent house numbers and flags so that evacuated houses can be identified so we don't have redundant work where spontaneous volunteers are tripping over themselves trying to find out is there anyone in that house that needs to be rescued. We had on-ground coordination after the event in our village, and it replicated our 2017 effort, and it was well served by our community because once communications go down, you're relying on a local information tent and a resource centre to make things happen. I've got 6 recommendations, if I can...
or you can table it, you can provide them to us and we can table and incorporate them.
Okay. I just wanted to mention the Tweed Valley flood study. That flood study was last updated in 2009 and relies on floods from 1989 and 1974. Both of those predate the Barney's Point Bridge being built and the M1 extension from Yelburn to Chinderup. Our community is very concerned that those structures are acting like a dam and holding back water on the floodplain. Our lived experience is that the flood heights we're experiencing at Tumbulgum are outside the range you'd expect with that flood study and don't match the response we received from the state government after the 2017 flood. We'd like some house raising to be expedited. We have people currently renovating houses, but it would be sequentially better if the houses could be raised at the same time. Funding for local equipment, better coordination of insurance. If insurance is meant to share risk, why are we playing a component for cyclones and bushfires and not floods, and some people being considered uninsurable in our village? And I'd like to commend our local SES. We have developed a close relationship with the SES over time, and they have been magnificent in passing on real-time and relevant information to our community. It has become harder as the central control has been developed by the SES, and the people centrally don't know where Tumbulgum is, and they also don't know the local situation. And as I was sitting at the back there, last thing, one of our local residents who's relocating to Victoria because her house is uninhabitable and she's waiting for her insurance company to come up with a plan to restore it, said, can you tell the committee about the Queensland Resilient Home Fund, and can New South Wales look at it, please?
Thank you. And before you go, I just realised after you began your presentation that I actually met you shortly after after the floods.
Yeah.
And I just want to publicly acknowledge all the work and all the commitment that you do for Tumbulgum.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Paul Hessian, and after Mr. Paul Hessian, we'll have Rebecca Hughes.
Thank you, sir. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Paul Hessian. I'm the owner, one of the owners of the pharmacy in King Street, which is just behind the Services Club here. So our area of town was hard hit when the flood levee wall broke. The water came through King Street, crossed to Wollumbin Street, didn't quite get to Main Street in this particular instance. So what I've got to say today is basically my experience of the lead up.
Speak into the microphone.
Sorry,
pull it towards you.
Is leading up to it. So I've worked and owned the pharmacy there for almost 30 years. Lots and lots of rain events and so on. So the road, I live at Tweed Heads, the road gets cut quite easily between Tweed Heads and Mooloolaba. So on the Saturday and the Sunday, the 26th and 27th of February, we were watching the rain come. We're talking to people from Mooloolaba, they were still able to get down the road and so on, so there was nothing untoward sort of happening. By Sunday, I started saying to my wife, we're going to have to get down to Mooloolaba so that we can be at the shop. Medication is obviously something that's essential. So anyway, about 5 o'clock, packed up, we left our kids, our teenage kids at home and headed down. So Sunday night, we stayed with my in-laws. My father-in-law is involved with SES, and look, I have to say they all do a great job, so there's nothing against anything that they do. The information that they were getting, though, wasn't enough. Even as we left, we were home, we were still getting information that this wasn't going to be a very bad event, that this was going to be okay. So on Sunday night, when I got to my in-laws' place, we just sort of thought, well, look, we're here, how about we go down to the shop, let's get the server computer out so that just in case something weird happens, we've got all our data still there. While we were down there, we took a drive around the street, people were starting to sandbag, we thought, right, okay, maybe we should do that. So we went to the SES headquarters, they were fantastic, organised some sandbags for us. We got down there and got all that happening. We were still being told that this wasn't going to be as big an event as 2017. We didn't get water into the pharmacy in 2017, so we were quite confident that we were going to be okay. We thought just we'll be absolutely certain. Put the sandbags on. Monday morning, we went to work to open up because no other pharmacist could get into their pharmacy. So we thought, right, even though it was difficult to get to us, people had to go through stormwater, we thought it was still worth opening just in case there were some urgent cases. So we had the pharmacy open, and we were listening to the reports. No, it's still not going to be a bad event and so on, not going to be as bad as 2017. We're watching the water come up closer and closer to the pharmacy. People are still coming into the shop, and they were grateful that we were open and everything. Then suddenly, my wife's monitoring the town Facebook page and says, there's just been an evacuation order for Mooloolaba CBD. We had been told nothing about it at all. So all of a sudden we're scrambling trying to find out. We weren't at this stage lifting the pharmacy because we still were being led to believe that it was still okay. And so anyway, then all of a sudden at about, say 11 o'clock or so, I got the text from the 44444 number, the emergency number saying evacuate the CBD. So that was when it was just like, right, lock the doors and get out. So we walked into the pharmacy in the morning, we were walking through calf height water. When we walked out, we were walking through thigh high water to get out of the place. And then of course, over the course of the day, the levy went up and over. We drove down to town in the afternoon, and we could, we knew for a fact there would have been water in. There was, and then it took 2 days for the water to get down. Tuesday we couldn't access the pharmacy. We kept going down. We waded through water to get there. It wasn't until Wednesday morning that we could actually get in. So from my observations, like the problem is the lack of accurate information. I know this was unprecedented and so on, but all the information seemed to be coming from a central place from down at Wollongong. Now I'm watching on Monday morning a friend of mine on Facebook whose property is up near Wollumba National Park, and he is just saying we are getting a monumental amount of rain up here. Well, Wollumba, you are going to wear this in 2 hours. So, we knew something bad was coming, but we still weren't getting any alerts sort of from it. So I think we need to have more use of local knowledge, I think is really important. There are people in this town who really understand, what is going on and where it's going. It's very difficult to get that when you're reading a screen from far away, so that's very difficult. The thing after the flood, no internet or mobile service. That was just unbelievable. I am trying to rebuild my pharmacy. I'm working on internet that if I'm on a VoIP call, I couldn't search the internet. That's how poor the internet quality was. It was unbelievable. So if you make something absolutely, it has, that it's essential, it has to be unbreakable.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Thank you.
So
thank you, Mr. Hughes. Mr. Hessian, sorry. Mr. Hessian, thank you. Rebecca Hughes, please.
Hello. I'm incredibly nervous, so I'm going to read. I'm starting the week of the 22nd of February, the week before. I live in a flood home. I am prepared that I'm in a flood home, so we anticipate the rain event. I began to move all of my large garden items, like ride-on mowers, to elevated positions, everything up in the shed, well above the 2017 height. I moved my car and my caravan up to the high point in our area, which is on Clothiers Creek Road, up on top of the hill, and I used my push bike for a week in preparation, because I did lose my car in 2017 and I didn't want that to happen again because it's very debilitating. As other people have spoken about, on the Sunday the 28th of February, it appeared we weren't going to have the river heights that we had experienced previously. We were only on a minor to moderate alert. I left my car and my caravan up the hill. We packed a bag in preparation just in case, and just waited to see if there were any orders. Unfortunately, due to poor drainage on my property and a lot of other people on Tweed Valley Way, we flood from the road first. It's a long time, hours before and sometimes days before the river actually breaks and breaches. So we need to get off and get out of the property way earlier. But as I've spoken to other places since, there is nowhere to go. The assumption is we have friends and relatives in the area that we can go to with our pets and all our possessions. I've only been here 12 years, so my family's on the Sunshine Coast, and my families are my neighbours that I've met, and they are in the same boat. Bad pun, but they're in the same boat. So my house is also a single-storey brick home. It cannot be raised. It's about 1 metre off the ground, so it has a little bit of elevation, but it cannot be raised. Throughout the evening, the 28th of February, we continued to monitor the river heights and water in our yard, keeping an eye on the river heights, on bomb. However, the information, as other people have spoken about, was not accurate. We used to listen to the radio, and we'd have river heights from way up in the hills, and you knew from our catchment areas what was going on at the time, at the minute. And we could make calls based on that because we know the time frames of when it's up there to when it's going to come to us to buy ourselves time to get out. But the information is often an hour, 2 hours too late. And like someone like me, we're cut off from the road. If we're not out a day or 2 days before sometimes, we are not leaving. So I do rely on the SES, and I cannot thank them enough and commend them enough for their actions and how professional they are in their response. But it's, unfortunately for us, a little bit too late. It's hectic and it's chaotic, and it need not be that way, but we do not have a permanent evacuation centre. We do not have facilities to go if you leave early. The second week of the flood, we had a second evacuation order once we did finally get to go home. Many were living in caravans and tents. I went down to the recovery centre on the Sunday when we knew the rain was coming. I asked where could we go, and they said there is nowhere. So my story actually begins in 2012. However, I bought a beautiful home on the river thinking I'll teach my son to water ski. I sold my house on the Sunshine Coast that was ironically on a hill. And I thought that's a lovely childhood for him. That's what I wanted for him. At the time of buying the river, I knew I was in a floodplain. However, I did not know at the time that the information I was getting on my bill of sale was not updated. It was not correct. I have plaques. We all have plaques on our house. We owned mill houses. It was a recent subdivision. It was only done in 2012. The homes were previously owned by the mill. Those heights were not correct. The plaque on our house showing the flood height is about that far off the ground. It was a flood 1972, which the council mill, no one can tell me what that flood was. There was no flood. It was misleading, and it was purposely misleading for when we bought those homes. I did not know they were going to build a highway that would create a dam. I did not know they were going to approve future developments further downstream to me, like King's Forest, that was going to create a dam. I did not know any of that. Those river heights, in 1954, the flood was only 43 centimetres lower than 2022 and only 13 centimetres lower than 2017. It was only 13 centimetres, yet building a levee wall has displaced the water further downstream, and we are getting up to 1.5 metres higher. Combination of all of those things. They're filling in the cane drains to mitigate against sulphuric acid entering into the river. All of those things are all combining, and we're sitting ducks. Thank you.
The next presenter is Pam Fontanius. Pam Fontanius. Jean Higgins. After Jean Higgins, Anne-Marie Miller.
Thank you for your time, everyone. My name's Jean Higgins, and I purchased a property in Wardrop Street in South Murwillumbah in 2018. And I haven't prepared what I was going to say today so that I could listen to everything and then go in the gaps, because there's a lot of horror stories about what actually physically happened in the flood. And I know that time is of the essence, and I want to give everyone a time to speak, and I hope that I do my fellow community justice and all of my flood devastated people justice, and I'm going to try and control my emotions. One of the big gaps and takeaways that I want to present today is communication. So during a near miss in 2019, I got a text message from the SES at 4 o'clock in the morning saying that I needed to be prepared for a flood. During this flood, I had no such thing. At about 10 o'clock, 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, I was lucky enough to be one of the streets that had almost like a fire truck, I think it was, that had a foghorn, an alarming nature to let us know that we needed to evacuate. And then followed by a couple of SES guys, I presume they were SES, knock on my door and let me know that the levy was about to go at 12 o'clock. and I had to evacuate. I'm a single homeowner. My family members are my 2 pugs. One has since passed. And I immediately said, well, I've already taken my van to high ground, and I didn't know what the landscape looked like. I was thinking, hang on, it's flooded. How can I walk with these 2 animals under each of my arms? And these are my babies. I've lost a child. It was my daughter's 10th birthday 2 days before the flood. Well, it would have been. So as you can appreciate, people may say pets are not your babies, but yes, they certainly are. So the communication there was immediately went, hang on, where I'm going, can I take my animals? They didn't know. I could see the rush in their face. They had so many places to go. I let them go. My decision was I'm my father's daughter. I'm my grandfather's daughter. I grew up in a cyclone town of Darwin, Northern Territory. I'm a Cyclone Tracy baby. I've been through many a disaster. I was very well prepared. I had an evacuation pack, even though I didn't plan on going. I had everything. I texted my family, my bank details, my super, everything in the case that I passed or I wasn't contactable for a number of days. It's just the drill. I'm quite used to it as a kid growing up. I have neighbours who are born and bred. And, you know, when I purchased that home, everyone's thinking it's not going to happen again, it's not going to happen again. I purchased this property knowing it was in a flood zone. I've worked 2 full-time jobs to save up for this. I've sacrificed. I've left the Gold Coast because I couldn't afford to pay $700 in leading upwards rent after starting again, after walking away from property. I have a business development background with Macquarie Bank Finance, Bankwest. I think a lot of the time that being in a low socio-economic area, people underestimate us. Being in this flood zone, in my street alone, quite a number of the homeowners are single women. I'm not saying this in any derogatory sense. What I'm saying is they're rock stars. We are a 1-income household and we purchased a property. I almost have a feeling, and I'll be honest, that I'm frowned upon. I'm a hangover of our community. I'm a second-class citizen because I'm in a flood zone. I deserve all of the human rights that everyone else has, and I purchased. Because I'm working 2 jobs, I'm flat out. I'm not able to do as much bloody research as I probably should have, but the only opportunity that I could enter the market and get out of the rat race and rental after being a homeowner and having a higher income perhaps before and changing my ways after losing a child, I expected that I was purchasing in a property that was very well prepared. And what you found today is that so many people have been to these meetings, and I rallied around and walked around yesterday as soon as I found out about it, walked on doors, knocked on doors, let all the business owners know. They had no idea it was here. And the feedback I was getting is these were really well presented. So many people turned up to the 2017 and nothing's happened. We are fatigued, we are fatigued, we are fatigued. I'm exhausted. Mental health, huge. I'll let you know what it's like. Imagine being on your own after 10, 12 days of no power and having the SES and the fire service peel you off the very top of your stairs after it's lapped into your home, lost everything downstairs. Being a self-employed or trade, you have everything downstairs. We know that we shouldn't have things downstairs, but where are you going to put it when storage is so high? I had a storage shed for 2 years. I just pulled it out because I couldn't afford it. Just had a balcony, pergola delivered from Bunnings, 2 sheds delivered, was waiting for the rains to stop, all gone. Okay, so now I'm in financial hardship. Where do I go? I'm making huge financial decisions. There's so much I want to say. We have to make so much financial decisions, the largest financial decisions, the most important financial decisions, and we're getting no answers. We need immediate answers because any help that we get, it's absorbed now. People are putting so much money into raising their houses. Any of the grants, are we throwing good money into bad? And what I want to say is there's 2 revenues of the communication levels. There's 2 revenues. One was through the DRG is through Revenue New South Wales. There was no information. It was pie in the sky. 3 months later, I've now just gotten a hello, you're on the system and it's happening. But guess what? The black and white back home grant was black and white. You're going to get it. Blah, blah, blah. 20 grand. Come in and get it. I went down to Services New South Wales, was even advised then, forget the DRG. No one, it's not staff. No one knows what the hell it is, Arthur or Martha. Everything I could find is that it's giving you a return to a basic standard of living. It's not going to cover garage doors. It's not going to cover sheds. It's not going to cover fencing. I'm sorry, but how's that not basic to house your animals and your children in your property when there are cars speeding past where you live? So, and it was no information. So we've got no information. We are that mentally fatigued. I've had a mental breakdown. I went down there, I was bawling my eyes out, and like our member said, someone had actually put their hand up and said, this person needs to be, an intake team called me. What do you think? Of course I'm stressed. I'm alone. I'm physically in the trenches, getting all this mud, doing everything. My family did fly in once they saw me on the news because I had looters and the amount and volume of debris in my backyard. And I've got to tell you now, I know I'm talking over my time, but I actually went to speak to Legal Aid down at Services New South Wales, and there was a 90-year-old man, and this is the first time that he's come out to ask for help. He's living in a mobile home in the cane fields, and he doesn't have a phone. He's ground level. Can imagine no power, no nothing. Can you imagine your grandfather being a proud man? I had to bite. I had my emotions in my throat listening to him. They're saying, where's your photos? Where's this? Where's that? He didn't take photos. He lost his phone. You know, and he was saying, oh, look, I don't need help. I managed to do it 5 years ago, but I'm older now. And guess what? They're shutting up shop in a week. Don't you dare shut up shop. People are only just coming up for air now. People have been crawled up in a ball in places, and they're only just getting, myself included, being able to speak without bawling. Okay, so don't shut up, don't you dare, and you need to. Why not get a bus? So don't be so arrogant to think that people are on Facebook, that they're on the internet. They're not. They're fatigued. They're head down, bum up. The people who are getting these things and getting onto things are the ones that actually probably, I need it, but there are people, the vulnerable people, who are giving up, and they're never going to put their hand up. And we are going to be a cost and a burden to you, because we are the new homeless. We have homes and we're the new homeless.
Thank you, Ms. Higgins.
Okay, thank you.
Anne-Marie Miller, please. And after Ms. Miller, we have Paul Lambert. Or Lambert.
Hi. I am in healthcare. I've been in healthcare for 35 years, and I was in the flood, and it's not a major intellectual assessment, but it was this much taller this time. It went into my house, and one thing that I've been discussing, when I get a chance, and a gentleman called Robert Hawken wrote an article about 2 weeks ago in our local paper on the 19th of May, and it was on dredging the river. Now, I've had people say, oh, good on you, try and go that with the environmentals. I'm not talking about mineral dredging like they used to do at the beach, where they took the sand away with the foliage and then brought the sand back clean, and then we had the erosion. I'm talking about cleaning out the bottom of the river, wherever it is. In particular, I'm talking Tweed, because it makes sense that the deeper the vessel, the more water that it'll fit, and the less that will go on the land. I know this is a floodplain, I'm not silly. However, I've been backed up by Auntie, which is the elder of the area from Tweed to Byron Bay. She backed me up at another forum which was held at the Regent Cinema a couple of weeks ago. And I stood up to the potential politicians there, and I said about the dredging, and she said she backed me up. Now, I know there's been geoengineers that have said it's not going to make much of a difference. I'm sorry, and I am a health scientist because I've got a master's degree, and I don't mean I'm any better than anyone else. However, I know science doesn't always tell you everything, and it is evolving. And so in this circumstance, it would be wise if we get the academics and the local people, and a common ground that's been going on with the speakers before me has been local, local, local. It's the local people that know the area. This is what Robin Hawkins wrote about in the article 2 weeks ago in the local paper. The farmers were doing it. There's a petition out at the moment for the farmers to do it, but they've got one of those stupid, technology buffs, stupid QR things to sign it in. I want handwritten names and addresses, because I'm sure that everyone that really thought about it and critically thought would realise that if we clean out, there's so much debris in that river. I've had someone go over in a private plane and seen a large tree drop, blocking the delta area of the river to the ocean. And I've been told there's cars in there and everything. even to make it that much less going over the land is going to mean that those houses that had that much water in it, they're not going to have the water in it. So I'm going to be short because mine is just, I think there needs to be more speaking with local people that understand the land, the Indigenous, beautiful First Nation people, and the people that have done the academics at university get together and actually sit down and start to talk about a preventative, because we talk about mitigation. Well, in medicine, I talk about prophylactic or preventative. And this would, you know, potentially save God knows how much money from the damage that's caused from not looking after just basic care of a river and the water. Thank you.
Thank you. The next presenter is Paul Lambert, followed by Sarah Robertson.
Hi, can you hear me all right? Thanks for the opportunity to speak. My wife and I are retired. We live a couple of hundred metres that way, beside the park, which means we're inside the levee. So it was an interesting experience to see the water come over the levee below the high school. It reached eye level from the ground, but our house floor is above that level. So actually it was not a particularly catastrophic event for us because we had the experience of the 17 flood. We had a caravan, we parked it in a high place. So we spent 2 nights out and came back. Problems are that any insurance for the bottom, which has now been approved, hasn't been seen. And that was 3 weeks ago. They approved it, haven't seen it been. But on the topic of insurance, if it's known that a place is going to flood, perhaps it's better not to insure it. I don't know what the opportunities are here in insurance, but if there could be an opt-out general insurance for a house, to opt out of the ground floor, possibly the huge increase, which I think we're going to see, could be mitigated. I don't really want to insure for something that I know is going to flood, but they have to insure it at the moment. It's either house and contents or it ain't. So as an option, I think that should be considered. Do you follow what I'm saying? Okay, so after the flood, certain problems. You've heard about communications, big problem, and of course the power went out, which is not very handy. Now we got a battery, so we didn't have the worst of that. This town levee is dependent on pumps to keep the water out. Those pumps don't have any backup. And in major weather events, they always go out for a certain period due to lack of power. May I suggest batteries? Can we have batteries on the pumps for the levee? 2 or 3 days worth. I think that's very important. The other thing is that I've just read a bit, not enough, but from what I read, when you mess with rivers, you decrease their ability to flow properly. So we've got a levee at Bray Park, which is there for a good reason, is to get water, but this is just a thought and I'd like it to be considered. So if water could be piped from the dam to Murwillumbah, we could take that levee out. It looks to me like there's a fairly large gap in the hills next to where the motel is on the south side. What's it called? The Art Gallery Motel? Yeah. That's kind of a blockage. So perhaps a free flow through there would also reduce pressure on the levee. So long term, short term, it's obvious, much has been spoken about what can be done, but long term, I think that should be examined. Can the river carry way more water if we let it run free, and what would that cost? So, yeah, we didn't get any warning, actually, but after the previous flood, we knew to watch the river levels in Oxley and Tweed, and we knew it was going to go over, so we made sure we were out. So maybe that could be made permanent, put into some sort of system. And finally, I've heard a lot about emergency here today, but I haven't heard climate emergency. I mean, if we don't have an appetite to grasp the results of the intergovernmental Climate Change Panel's most recent statement, which is we're shooting straight past 1.5, probably over 2, no matter what we do, could go to 3, then everything that's going to be planned here today is a waste of time. We must tackle the big issue. Well, that's it, really.
Thank you, sir. Sarah Robertson, followed by Jim Larkin.
Good afternoon, committee. Thank you for the opportunity and thanks for coming here. Like everybody presenting, a little nervous and a little shaken, a little in the flood recovery mode. We're all a bit wobbly. So I just a quick little bit about me and my situation. I'm a general psychologist. I work with water trauma. I'm also a water person, as in multi-generationally. I live literally just right across the river here, have done for 10 years, but I'm 5th generation from the Richmond Catchment as well. So, and my parents live on the Richmond River there. I went through 2017, largely on my own with 2 children, with just the wonderful community around, and I was one of the people. One of the things that happens in a flood is that people do one of several things. They can either stand up and work towards their best effort, other people go into shock, other people retreat and have reluctance to be able to manage their own recovery. I was one of those people that was able to stand up and help my street. And I worked closely with other community leaders that sort of worked from the town side and supported community in and around itself. There were certain frameworks set up at that time that in 2022, in our the first flood, all those systems were just sort of switched back on. Even though communications were difficult, it actually reconnected all of the previous flood victims and reconnected them again this time. And we set about the huge organic minute-by-minute task of recovering and engaging with whatever we needed to do. Within these 2 sort of times, my strengths are in social psychology, and I sort of set about mentally planning, creating a bit of an observation, which then turned into the development of a strategy, which is a mitigation and response almanac, which I have since pitched to Chris Cherry, Mal Lanyon. I actually had a meeting with him today, which I cancelled to come to this. And I've been working with, I've pitched it to Tony O'Connor, the Tweed Shire Resilience Officer. I've spoken to several councillors in the Richmond LGAs, the 5 there. And I believe what it does is fill the huge gap that exists in the complete lack of representation for these highly resilient communities that do all of the work in the first week. Now, in that first week, people have adrenaline. They are dealing with things the best that they can. And this is across all disasters too, I've come to learn. So whether it be flood, fire, cyclone, whatever it is, people jump to it, they respond. And what happens in that first 4 days dictates what happens in recovery and response thereafter. And things change and things do become more complicated after that point. But it's within that first 4 days that the most of the recovery occurs. And the communities that every government official at every level, likes to thank and, honour and, commandeer, actually they can't name them, they don't know where they are, they have zero representation unless they formally organise themselves. These are also people that are heavily flood affected. They have no energy to do much. So some are successful in joining and becoming an incorporated or joining enough so that they can seek auspicing through charities, but that's honestly, it would be less than 10% of these micro communities within a catchment or within a disaster zone. It's a mitigation and response almanac that I've developed. I'm seeking to pitch it to Shane Fitzsimmons from Resilience New South Wales. I would have done so already, but I'm just recovering from COVID with my family as well. That's in the pipeline, but I just really wanted to make note of the fact that there is that's the piece that's missing. That's why you don't know as much as you need to know, because there's no way of understanding all of these micro communities that do exist in full and how you can seek to communicate with them. And so a framework that supports them, and it's a structure that provides a place for them within this discussion that is long-term, and it is mitigation, and it is response and recovery.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Jim Larkin. Mr. Jim Larkin. And then the following speaker will be Ari Talon. Are you Mr. Larkin? Me? Yep. That's fine.
Hello, Jim Larkin. I was on the original committee because I had a little business in town years ago. I'm old and retired now. But when they built the levee bank that's there at the moment, they had a big committee on that job, and Oceanics from Sydney came up and did a map of the whole area, and they were talking about dredging the river, and Oceanics said that's not really going to work, and I thought that was a lot of rot and that it probably would have worked. But anyhow, they've since done an experiment where they put a metre in the river off the bridge here in Mooloolaba during a flood, and they found that 1 foot down the river was flowing at a rate of knots. They lowered it foot by foot by foot, and when they got down to about 8 foot, the river was hardly moving at all. Anyway, also when you think of it, if the river is so deep and the floodplains are hundreds and thousands of hectares, once the river fills up and it flows over those hundreds of hectares, what's going down that little channel, which is the river, is bugger all. Even if you make the river, instead of being this deep, if you made it that deep, it's not going to help, because the water down there is just sitting there. The other side of it is flood pumps, and we've got some flood pumps here in the main part of town, but they don't work if the power goes off. Someone suggested batteries, but they don't need batteries. What they need is a decent generator, because a decent flood pump is putting out or is drawing a real lot of power, and you need to have an enormous battery storage to accommodate it. And the other thing I wanted to say was, in William Street in Mooloolaba, that area over near Brothers Football Club, well, it's not called Mustangs Football Club, council have built a big levee bank behind it, and that levee bank holds the water in that William Street area, and if they had a flood pump there, that would save all those houses that go under every time there's a decent flood. And the cost of putting a flood pump in might be $50,000 or $60,000, I'm not sure. I was an electrician in my days, but a decent generator to run that flood pump if there's a blackout would be no more than $100,000. And every house that goes under a flood, you've got to say it's probably around about $100,000 to fix them up. Just at a rough guess. I might be wrong there. It might be more than $100,000 on average. So if that little flood pump was put there with a generator to run it if the power goes off, cost $150,000, you'd have to say that's 1.5 houses. I don't know what it would cost to put a decent generator to run the flood pumps out of the main part of town, but that black strain that somebody else was talking about a minute ago, it breaking and giving way and letting all that water go into Stonelow's cane paddocks, that saved the town. Of course, if... No, but if you saw the 74 flood, how it really did fill up the main street. There was a picture of Butch Anderson in the paper stand in front of the jewellery shop smoking a cigarette, and he's a big tall bloke, and the water was up to his neck. Now, it was only up to his feet in 2022, so what came into the main part of town was bugger all compared with back then. Yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Do we have Ari? Yeah, okay, good. And then after Ari, we have the group of Ursula, Lisa, and Gemma.
G'day, my name's Ari. I'm a community development and youth worker. Just first, I think there maybe should be an inquiry into inclusive participation, operating times, the forum of public participation in these discussions, because this doesn't really feel very accessible for a lot of the community, and there's been pretty poor performance of community forums from other levels of government and local representatives. So I feel like there's a much bigger need for dialogue and the community having a say. There's a lot of big youth issues in this town after the impacts of the floods and following COVID. So I run a program called River Tracks, which is based on the program you might have heard of called Backtrack in Armidale, working with youth at risk. But what I'm mainly here to talk about is community resilience and future natural disasters, acknowledging the compounding impacts of the climate crisis and the housing crisis that we're already facing in these areas in a really big way. I'm very worried for this region. I grew up here in Lismore. I was in Lismore when the floods hit. Rainforests used to cover this country and acts like a big sponge. And so when you chop it all down, it's just going to increase the surface flow of water. Doesn't matter what you do, it's going to cause huge problems. And we're facing the consequences of that. And I'm pretty worried for all the surrounding villages and people who live in rural properties about their continual access over the decades to come. But what I think that you guys have a lot of potential to do is to observe what are the conditions that allow a community to be more resilient, so that regardless of what Resilience New South Wales does and other organisations, the communities can jump on their feet and respond to issues. We need volunteerism, we need mutual aid, we need community organisations that are able to respond to change and disruption. We saw a fantastic effort here in the form of the Community Hub. Unfortunately, that was an organisation that depended on the benevolence of some private space, the otherwise vacant space, which there isn't much of in this area. There's a huge lack of space. And it's fallen apart because of different work styles, because it wasn't an existing organisation. So we've got a real lack of community capacity. I mean, partially it is there's a huge housing crisis and young people and working people really struggle to afford to live in this area. It's increasingly becoming a place for older, wealthier people and no one else, is what I can observe. But we need, essentially in terms of tangible ask, we need space for the community to prepare and stow possession safely, to stow response equipment and to gather afterwards to respond to floods and natural disasters, and we don't have that out of the flood zone. We need spaces for established community organisations out of the flood zone. So where we're operating from is under the Scout Hall. We got flooded, we had to rebuild, and then we got told 3 months later by the insurances we have to leave again. So we're operating out of half a cane shed and just trying to scrape along by the skin of our arse at the moment to keep the most disadvantaged youth in our community engaged. And we don't have any out of flood zone space, let alone space that isn't in flood zone. We need a neighbourhood community organisation, and so we need support for these organisations to exist that can take in new projects like a community resilience project for future floods and support them to grow and thrive. We have a community centre, but it's not a neighbourhood centre. And although they do great work, I tried to become a member, so many others have, and you get turned back. There's no opportunity to become a member. So sometimes that happens. They do good work. They have a food hub. They've got a homelessness house, but they hire out the rooms. You have to have insurance.
you can't go there and have a meeting if you don't have money and you don't have insurance. So that makes a lot of community initiatives trying to start out facing very difficult waters. And that's where community resilience comes from. It comes from groups of people gathering. So we need a space, a neighbourhood association. We don't have one of those, so that we can have meeting rooms for groups. So these are all issues that I think are really key in Mooloolaba, because we don't have space for programs, we don't have space for organisations out of the flood zone. If the flood was a bit bigger, Coolmont House, where the Family Centre, a bunch of other service organisations and the community centre is currently operating out of, it would have hit there as well. And there would be no community services right now operating. So let's get rid of the golf course and create some more community organisations space. Maybe Wollumban High School, because that's supposed to be ditched soon as well. That could be some community housing, it could be a river track space, could be a neighbourhood centre. There's lots of opportunities. We just need local government to be run by the councillors and less run by the staff pushing them around, which is what I've been seeing as well.
Thank you, Mr. Cullen. Now we're having three people together, Ursula, Lisa, and Gemma. And a fourth person. And a fourth person.
Like you got 4 chairs.
It's a good thing we have 4 chairs.
Okay. So just introducing the fourth person, this is my daughter Zoe.
Zoe. What's Zoe's family name for Hansard?
Wharton as well.
Okay, good. She'll be recorded in Hansard now. Okay. Please begin.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity to speak. My name's Gemma Martin. I'm going to try and represent Lisa and Ursula as well. I probably won't take up all of their time too, but I think they might have something to say as well. But I'm also here representing our street, which is Railway Street. If you're not aware, it's just about a couple of hundred metres this way. And I think we're probably some of the worst affected houses in the whole of the Mooloolaba area. This is the second flood that I have been through since I moved here. I actually was born in Mooloolaba, so I'm from here, but I moved back when I decided to have a family about 5 years ago, and was very shortly after flooded in Railway Street. That's how I got to know my amazing neighbours, and we're very lucky to have a great community in our street. We really look after each other and keep each other well informed about things that are happening. And I suppose, you know, just to give you a little bit of a picture of what that looks like, we got to know each other on the railway platform at the 2017 floods, which is where we found refuge from the flood. Like many other residents here, there's nowhere for us to go once the warnings come through. We also have been, you know, and we're a bit more experienced now, of course, but when we first moved here, we were told you'll see the flood coming for days, your guinea pig's feet might get wet, but you've got plenty of time to prepare for a flood. In the 2017 flood, we went to sleep at about 11 o'clock at night with no water in our backyard. By 1 a.m, our neighbours were knocking on our door telling us to get out because the water was lapping our floorboards. And our house is slightly raised. It's obviously not raised enough. But, you know, that's a considerable amount of water in a short period of time. Since then, I've had kids, so thankfully I had a little bit of foresight, more obviously than the SES somehow, and got out this time well before the roads were closed. But, you know, we lost everything. We're looking at, you know, in excess of maybe $200,000, $300,000 worth of damage to our home and contents, which, you know, we're insured for. I guess we're lucky, but that means nothing has happened in our house. We're still living in temporary accommodation, and if we weren't lucky enough to know people who had accommodation available here for us, we would be living in our vans, or like our neighbours are, or, you know, in our cars. I don't know where we would be living. So housing is a really big issue for us. We've been rallying with the council and the state government for assistance for flood mitigation for our homes. So really, I guess we're looking for something that's timely. We can't wait until the next flood, which realistically could happen next year. Apparently we're in a 3-year La Nina cycle. I can't spend $200,000 on my house to see it all go again, and quite frankly, I just don't know how, you know, my family's health will go if that would go through another third flood. So we've been requesting support for housing elevation, as it seems like the fastest thing to get us out of immediate danger, and there's a chance that we'll have to pay for that ourselves, because it seems like the council are awfully reluctant. I've heard from the council and from the mayor that the problem with housing elevation is that people build in underneath, and you know what that means to us is we would actually have somewhere to live right now. We might have a damaged storage space under our house. We might have some damaged garden tools. We would have a home to live in. So that problem that you're giving us is not a problem for us. It's actually it's a problem for you somehow. And if it's a problem for you, then please find us a solution. We're open to other solutions. We just need something to happen fast before we go and spend all that money on our homes and rebuild, and then find out that, your houses are going to get flooded again. And also we'd like to encourage the government to do an independent hydrology study to have a look at the impact of the various developments that have happened since the previous floods in, say, 74. I cannot say that the flood wall doesn't have an impact on the south side. I mean, the fact that Black's Drain blew out the last 2 floods would only suggest to you that some of that water that would normally go through town ends up on the south side. However, consistently we hear that the flood study, the hydrology report that was done in the 90s said that there was only about 10 centimetre impact or something for houses south of Collins Street. Cognitively, I can't understand that. I'd really love to see an independent study performed to actually confirm where the water flow is not going, and what the impacts perhaps are of the Bunnings Point Bridge and other developments that have been allowed to happen. I'd really like you to bear in mind that we're families, these are individuals, we are the citizens of this country, we're not businesses. It feels like business does get a little bit of a first choice when it comes to restoration after the flood. Well, there has been a program, land swap. There has been a land swap program in place for businesses in South Mooloolaba since the 2017 flood. We've been on a list to get our houses elevated since the 2017 flood, and told that we are 20 years away from getting funding for that. Had I known that at the time, I probably would have just elevated my house after the 2017 flood, but that's not the information I was given at that time. So, yeah, we need help. We need it fast. We need a plan so that we can make some decisions about our lives and move forward.
Thanks, Ms. Martin. Now, would Ursula or Lisa wish to speak?
Did you raise your hand? So we need safety.
Sorry, what is your name?
My name's Ursula. Ursula Wharton. We need safety now, and we need an end to the uncertainty now. There are 20 houses in the street, 15 of which flooded through the floor and lost everything. There are 12 children in our street. As Gemma said, the promise was there after the 2017 floods to raise us, but the money wasn't there. So the time for talk is over. We need answers now, we need safety now, and we need the funding to back that up now.
Thank you. Lisa, would you like to speak?
Okay, I'll try. My name's Lisa, and I was in the 2017 and the 22 flood. The first one, like Gemma, my neighbours carried myself and my animals over to the railway station, where thankfully I got out just in time. We were given the information that we would be given help. A single person, my partner, had died 6 months before the flood. I put everything I had into making my home again, just to have it taken away. I wasn't given insurance. I'm now trying to build my home again. But I'm losing hope. I don't know what to do. I don't have the money, and I don't have the mental capacity to lose it 3 times. And I just need an answer. Our street needs an answer. They're not getting, their insurance people aren't helping them. Nobody's getting back to us. I haven't even lived out of my home. I ripped out the walls. I slept on the floor. I've got no kitchen. The numbers that you're getting for people that are displaced, it's not counting. People living in the vans in the street, people living in a home with no walls, people living in their friends' places. And it's just taking so long, and we're losing hope. we're losing energy, we're just giving up. And we're trying to work, we're trying to build, we're trying to support each other, but we just can't anymore. We need some answers. And I'm sorry I'm so upset, but I've been strong and I've not cried this whole time since the flood, but I'm just giving up. Thank you.
She's not the only one.
Zoe's been through it all twice. Well, this time, and she's an amazing child, and she helped make coffees while everyone was falling apart.
Exactly right.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. We now have, I'm sorry, Susie and Bruce Weston. Susie and Bruce Weston.
That's you.
Susie
Time
and
for you.
Oh, are you?
My husband is deaf.
Yeah. I'm a little bit deaf. Mr. Chairman, honourable members of the council, welcome to Murwillumbah. It's been an interesting afternoon. Thank you very much. Been through 5 of them so far, but another one doesn't matter. Going to be interesting to see how you're going to go back to water and fisheries and parks and parks and recreation. But all right, that's your problem. We've got enough problems of our own. But the council and the government can do something immediately to relieve the stress and worry that 90%, well, all of us have got, particularly businessmen and people that have gone through the flood and everything. They can mandate on the insurance to have a completely guilt-free insurance so that the insurance covers all risks and cannot exclude flood insurance as it's been doing over the many, many years. And that's something that that government can do tomorrow. Introduce legislation to make insurance companies non-discriminatory, and that's it. That's all I have to say. Bear in mind, I've been fully insured for the last 2 floods and collected more than $2 million in compensation for the damage that's been done to my property. So, you know, I think that everybody should be getting that, and everybody should be able. I'm hearing all these stories from Lismore. Oh, they're not going to renew our insurance. Oh, they wouldn't give us insurance last year and things like that. That's not fair to the community that you can't get flood insurance. I think they might be telling a few lies. I think they can get flood insurance if they want to pay for it. But some of the stories you hear, some of the stories you hear are so astronomical, they're unbelievable, because they're not true. They're just made up. They're just excuses. Well, why I didn't insure my property. Anyway, that's something that...
Thank you, Mr. Weston. Thank you.
Thank you.
We actually live on Black Strain, which was Black Swamp, and we were put into the situation where they built a dam last time and the water went straight through our house. If you like, I have photographs here, videos of them wiping out our place.
You can arrange to email them to the Secretary.
I'd given them to one of the councillors, to Celine Adams from the inquiry. She's got them all. She's sent to the state government. Okay, she's the state government inquiry girl for the flood.
Oh, for the state government. Okay.
And Celine Adams has got them. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, for those who didn't speak today, but would still like to send material or share their story, that they can contact the staff at the Secretariat, and there is an online survey, online questionnaire that you can use. So I think that concludes our hearing today. Thank you. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Can we just say one thing? The fact that these are held during business hours when people who are lucky enough to not lose their business in the flood and who are lucky enough to have children take them to school still, they are not able to access these meetings, and it's quite arrogant and it presumes a feeling and a sentiment of you don't want to hear us and you don't want to help us because you need to meet us where we're at. And we are important, we matter, these are our life decisions. Every person in this whole entire Northern Rivers, you need to have these meetings after hours and accessible to all people and communicate not just via a post on a Facebook page for Tweed Shire Council where people don't have internet. We've had our phones on SOS for 10 days still now.
Okay.
And so please, after hours, so that
It's easy. Yeah, it's easy.
But thank you very much.
Yeah, Kate, it's easy for you. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. Easy. Now, sir, before you begin, you have 5 minutes, okay?
Okay. I've been volunteering for the Tweed area well over 20 years since I've been here. I've been an SES volunteer for over 15 years, and I'm just referring that if you are recommending something to the government, can you please tell the government to delete the mandate for SES volunteers. I've been trained for everything, floodbaits, roof, everything, and I cannot volunteer for the SES because I have not had the vax. I'm not anti-vax. I'm just not sticking that poison in my body. Okay. So that's my thing. I support a lot of flood victims on my property, and I also I did hear something about the people as a government thing to encourage more houses on a property. There's so many flood victims that I've support on my property. I hope there's no one in here in council that will come back on me, but you know, I do support people. I've started the men's shed in Murwillumbah. I've got through Mr. Provost, I got a good grant to start the Tweed Heads men's shed. And you know, I do a lot of support. I've spent well over $40,000 of my own money to support these people by buying different things, but it's just me. I do need some support. I do need some electricians, some builders. I just can't do it all myself. But if someone can help me in some way, like electricians, you know, tradespeople, that would be fantastic. One more thing I'd like to say. I did purchase a red rattler from the back in 92, 93. I purchased a red rattler from Sydney.
Yes.
I was about to purchase the stainless steel. The stainless steel two-storey trains were being delivered anywhere in New South Wales for $10,000 at that time. They're probably a lot more now. Fuel's gone up, everything else has gone up. They would make an excellent housing. To better block them up right through the centre of the wall, both walls, there's two flats. So I think if we can put those, maybe get some of these stainless steel trains from the railway department in Sydney, that would make some excellent accommodation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now, this is the one meeting for this town. Now and this will actually this is the one meeting for the town from the parliamentary inquiry. Now there is a government inquiry, but this is the parliamentary inquiry, and this is the only one here. But
what's the timeline for us to receive what the decisions are going to be?
So what's that? We're reporting to the government in August. August.
Wow, okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank